One summer's evening, an astonishing piece of news reached the ivy bush and green dragon. Giants and the other portents on the borders of the Shire were forgotten for more important matters. Mr. Frodo was selling Bag End. Indeed, he had already sold it to the Sackville Bagginses.
For a nice bit too,
said some.
at a bargain price,
Said others.
And that's more likely when Mistress Lobelia's the buyer.
Otho had died some years before, at the ripe but disappointed age of 102. Just why Mr. Frodo was selling his beautiful hole was even more debatable than the price. A few held the theory, supported by nods and hints, of Mr. Baggins himself, that Frodo's money was running out. He was going to leave Hobbiton and live in a quiet way on the proceeds of the sale down in Buckland among his Brandybuck relations.
As far from the Sackville Bagginses as may be,
some added. But so firmly fixed had the notion of the immeasurable wealth of the Bagginses of Bag End become that most found this hard to believe, harder than any other reason or unreason that their fancy could suggest. To most, it suggested a dark and yet unrevealed plot by Gandalf. Though he kept himself very quiet and did not go about by day, it was well known that he was
hiding up in Bag End.
But however a removal might fit with the designs of his wizardry, there was no doubt about the fact. Frodo Baggins was going back to Buckland.
Yes, I shall be moving this autumn,
He said.
Mary Brandybuck is looking out for a nice hole for me, or perhaps a small house.
As a matter of fact, with Mary's help, he had already chosen and bought a little house at Crick Hollow in the country beyond Bucklebury. To all but Sam, he pretended he was going to settle down there permanently. The decision to set out eastwards had suggested the idea to him, for Buckland was on the eastern borders of the Shire, and as he had lived there in childhood, his going back would at least seem credible. Gandalf stayed in the Shire for over 2 months. Then one evening, at the end of June, soon after Frodo's plan had been finally arranged, he suddenly announced that he was going off again the next morning.
Only for a short while, I hope.
He said.
But I'm going down beyond the southern borders to get some news if I can. I have been idle longer than I should.
He spoke lightly, but it seemed to Frodo that he looked rather worried.
Has anything happened?
He said.
Well, no, but I have heard something that has made me anxious and needs looking into. If I think it necessary, after all, for you to get off at once, I shall come back immediately, or at least send word. In the meantime, stick to your plan. But be more careful than ever, especially of the ring. Let me impress on you once more. Don't use it.
He went off at dawn.
I may be back any day,
He said.
At the very latest, I shall come back to the farewell party. I think, after all, you may need my company on the road.
At first, Frodo was a good deal disturbed, and wondered often what Gandalf could have heard. But his uneasiness wore off, and in the fine weather he forgot his troubles for a while. The Shire had seldom seen so fair a summer, or so rich an autumn. The trees were laden with apples, honey was dripping from the cones, and the corn was tall and full. Autumn was well underway before Frodo began to worry about Gandalf again. September was passing, and there was still no news of him. The birthday and the removal drew nearer, and still he did not come, or send word. Bag End began to be busy. Some of Frodo's friends came to stay and help him with the packing. There was Fredegar Bolger and Folko Boffin, and of course his special friends Pippin Tuke and Merry Brandybuck. Between them, they turned the whole place upside down. On September 20th, 2 covered carts went off laden to Buckland, conveying the furniture and goods that Frodo had not sold to his new home, by way of the Brandywine Bridge. The next day, Frodo became really anxious and kept a constant lookout for Gandalf. Thursday, his birthday morning, dawned as fair and clear as it had long ago for Bilbo's great party. Still, Gandalf did not appear. In the evening, Frodo gave his farewell feast. It was quite small, just a dinner for himself and his 4 helpers. But he was troubled, and fell in no mood for it. The thought that he would so soon have to part with his young friends weighed on his heart. He wondered how he would break it to them. The 4 younger hobbits were, however, in high spirits, and the party soon became very cheerful in spite of Gandalf's absence. The dining room was bare except for a table and chairs, but the food was good, and there was good wine. Frodo's wine had not been included in the sale to the Sackville Bagginses.
Whatever happens to the rest of my stuff when the SBs get their claws on it, at any rate, I have found a good home for this,
said Frodo as he drained his glass. It was the last drop of Old Wynyards. When they had sung many songs and talked of many things they had done together, they toasted Bilbo's birthday. And then they drank his health and Frodo's together according to Frodo's custom. Then they went out for a sniff of air and glimpse of the stars. And then they went to bed. Frodo's party was over, and Gandalf had not come. The next morning they were busy packing another cart with the remainder of the luggage. Merry took charge of this, and drove off with Fatty, that is, Frediga Bolger.
Someone must get these and warm the house before you arrive,
said Merry.
Well, see you later. The day after tomorrow if you don't go to sleep on the way.
Folko went home after lunch, but Pippin remained behind. Frodo was restless and anxious, listening in vain for a sound of Gandalf. He decided to wait until nightfall. After that, if Gandalf wanted him urgently, he would go to Crickhollow, and might even get there first, for Frodo was going on foot. His plan, for pleasure and a last look of the Shire as much as any other reason, was to walk from Hobbiton to Bucklebury Ferry, taking it fairly easy.
I shall get myself a bit into training too,
he said, looking at himself in a dusty mirror in the half-empty hall. He had not done any strenuous walking for a long time, and the reflection looked rather flabby, he thought. After lunch, the Sackville Bagginses, Lobelia, and her sandy-haired son Lotho turned up, much to Frodo's annoyance.
Ours at last,
said Lobelia as she stepped inside. It was not polite nor strictly true, for the sale of Bag End did not take effect until midnight. But Lobelia can perhaps be forgiven. She had been obliged to wait about 77 years longer for Bag End than she once hoped. And she was now 100 years old. Anyway, she had come to see that nothing she had paid for had been carried off, and she wanted the keys. It took a long while to satisfy her, as she had brought a complete inventory with her, and went right through it. In the end she departed with Lotho and the spare key, and the promise that the other key would be left at the Gamgees in Bagshot Row. She snorted, and showed plainly that she thought the Gamgees capable of plundering the whole during the night. Frodo did not offer her any tea. He took his own tea with Pippin and Sam Gamgee in the kitchen. It had been officially announced that Sam was coming back to Buckland,
To do for Mr. Frodo, and look after his bit of garden.
an arrangement that was approved by the gaffer, though it did not console him for the prospect of having Lobelia as a neighbour.
our last meal at Bag End,
said Frodo, pushing back his chair. They left the washing up for Lobelia. Pippin and Sam strapped up their 3 packs and piled them in the porch. Pippin went out for a last stroll in the garden. Sam disappeared. The sun went down. Bag End seemed sad and gloomy and dishevelled. Frodo wandered round the familiar rooms and saw the light of the sunset fade on the walls and shadows creep out of the corners. It grew slowly dark indoors. He went out and walked down to the gate at the bottom of the path, and then on a short way down the hill road. He half expected to see Gandalf come striding up through the dusk. The sky was clear and the stars were glowing bright.
It's going to be a fine night,
He said aloud.
That's good for a beginning. I feel like walking. I can't bear any more hanging about. I'm going to start. And Gandalf must follow me.
He turned to go back, and then stopped, for he heard voices just round the corner by the end of Bagshot Row. One voice was certainly the old gaffer's. The other was strange, and somehow unpleasant. He could not make out what it said, but he heard the gaffer's answers, which were rather shrill. The old man seemed put out.
No, Mr. Baggins has gone away. Went this morning, and my Sam went with him. And anyway, all his stuff went. Yet sold out and gone, I tell ye. But why? Why's none of my business or yours? Where to? That ain't no secret. He's moved to Bucklebury or some such place, away down yonder. Yes, it is. A tidy way. I've never been so far myself. They'd queer folks in Buckland. No, I can't give no message. Good night to you.
Footsteps went away down the hill. Frodo wondered vaguely why the fact that they did not come up on the hill seemed a great relief.
I am sick of questions and curiosity about my doings, I suppose.
He thought.
What an inquisitive lot they all are.
He had half a mind to go and ask the gaffer who the inquirer was, but he thought better, or worse of it, and turned and walked quickly back to Bag End. Pippin was sitting on his pack in the porch. Sam was not there. Frodo stepped inside the dark door.
Sam?
He called.
Sam! Time!
Coming, sir.
Came the answer from far within, followed soon by Sam himself, wiping his mouth. He had been saying farewell to the beer barrel in the cellar.
All aboard, Sam?
Said Frodo.
Yes, sir. I'll ask for a bit now, sir.
Frodo shut and locked the round door, and gave the key to Sam.
Run down with this to your home, Sam.
He said.
Then cut along the row and meet us as quick as you can at the gate in the lane beyond the meadows. We're not going through the village tonight. Too many ears pricking and eyes prying.
Sam ran off at full speed.
Well, now we're off at last,
said Frodo. They shouldered their packs and took up their sticks and walked round the corner to the west side of Bag End.
Goodbye,
said Frodo, looking at the dark blank windows. He waved his hand and then turned and, following Bilbo if he had known it, hurried after Peregrine down the garden path. They jumped over the low place in the hedge at the bottom and took to the fields, passing into the darkness like a rustle in the grasses. At the bottom of the hill on its western side they came to the gate opening on to a narrow lane. There they halted and adjusted the straps for their packs. Presently Sam appeared, trotting quickly and breathing hard. His heavy pack was hoisted high on his shoulders, and he had put on his head a tall, shapeless felt bag, which he called a hat. In the gloom, he looked very much like a dwarf.
I'm sure you have given me all the heaviest stuff,
said Frodo.
I pity snails, and all that carry their homes on their backs. I could take a lot more yet, sir. My packet is quite light,
said Sam stoutly and untruthfully.
No, you don't, Sam,
said Pippin.
It is good for him. He's got nothing except what he ordered us to pack. He's been slack lately, and he'll feel the weight less when he's walked off some of his own. Be kind to a poor old hobbit,
laughed Frodo.
I shall be as thin as a willow wand, I'm sure, before I get to Buckland. But I was talking nonsense. I suspect you have taken more than your share, Sam. And I shall look into it at our next packing.
He picked up his stick again.
Well, we all like walking in the dark,
he said.
So let's put some miles behind us before bed.
For a short way they followed the lane westwards. Then leaving it they turned left and took quietly to the fields again. They went in single file, along hedgerows and the borders of coppices, and night fell dark about them. In their dark cloaks they were as invisible as if they all had magic rings. Since they were all hobbits, and were trying to be silent, they made no noise that even hobbits would hear. Even the wild things in the fields and woods hardly noticed their passing. After some time they crossed the water, west of Hobbiton, by a narrow plank bridge. The stream was there no more than a winding black ribbon, bordered with leaning Ardler trees. A mile or two further south they hastily crossed the great road from the Brandywine Bridge. They were now in the Tukeland, and bending southeastwards they made for the Green Hill country. As they began to climb its first slopes, they looked back and saw the lamps in Hobbiton far off twinkling in the gentle valley of the water. Soon it disappeared in the folds of the darkened land, and was followed by Bywater beside its grey pool. When the light of the last farm was far behind, peeping among the trees, Frodo turned and waved a hand in farewell.
I wonder if I shall ever look down into that valley again, he said quietly.
When they had walked for about 3 hours, they rested. The night was clear, cool and starry, but smoke like wisps of mist were creeping up the hillsides from the stream and deep meadows. Thin-clad birches swaying in a light wind above their heads made a black net against the pale sky. They ate a very frugal supper, for hobbits, and then went on again, Soon they struck a narrow road that went rolling up and down, fading grey into the darkness ahead, the road to Woodhall and Stock and the Bucklebury Ferry. It climbed away from the main road in the water valley and wound over the skirts of the green hills, towards Woody End, a wild corner of the East Farthing. After a while they plunged into a deeply cloven track between tall trees that rustled their dry leaves in the night. It was very dark. At first they talked, or hummed a tune softly together, being now far away from inquisitive ears. Then they marched on in silence, and Pippin began to lag behind. At last they began to climb a steep slope. He stopped and yawned.
I am so sleepy,
He said,
that soon I shall fall down on the road. Are you going to sleep on your legs? It's nearly midnight. I thought you liked walking in the dark.
said Frodo.
But there is no great hurry. Mary expects us sometime the day after tomorrow, but that leaves us nearly 2 days more. We'll halt at the first likely spot. The wind's in the west,
said Sam.
If we get to the other side of this hill, we shall find a spot that is sheltered and snug enough, sir. There is a dry fir wood just ahead, if I remember rightly.
Sam knew the land well within 20 miles of Hobbiton, but that was the limit of his geography. Just over the top of the hill, they came on the patch of fir wood. Leaving the road, they went into the deep resin-scented darkness of the trees and gathered dead sticks and cones to make a fire. Soon they had a merry crackle of flame at the foot of a large fir tree, and they sat round it for a while, until they began to nod. Then, each in an angle of the great tree's roots, they curled up in their cloaks and blankets, and were soon fast asleep. They set no watch. Even Frodo feared no danger yet, for they were still in the heart of the Shire. A few creatures came and looked at them when the fire had died away. A fox, passing through the wood on business of his own, stopped several minutes and sniffed, but he never found out any more about it. The morning came, pale and clammy. Frodo woke up first and found that the tree root had made a hole in his back, and that his neck was stiff.
Walking for pleasure. Why didn't I drive?
He thought, as he usually did at the beginning of an expedition.
And all my beautiful feather beds are sewed to the Sackville Packinses. These tree roots would do them good.
He stretched.
Wake up, hobbits!
He cried.
It's a beautiful morning.
Oh, what's so beautiful about it?
Said Pippin, peering over the edge of his blanket with one eye.
Sam, get breakfast ready for 9:30. Have you got the bathwater hot?
Sam jumped up, looking rather bleary.
Oh, no, sir. I haven't, sir.
He said. Frodo stripped the blankets from Pippin and rolled him over, and then walked off to the edge of the wood. Away eastward, the sun was rising red out of the mist that lay thick in the world. Touched with gold and red, the autumn trees seemed to be sailing rootless in a shadowy sea. A little below him, to the left, the road ran down steeply into a hollow and disappeared. When he returned, Sam and Pippin had got a good fire going.
Water!
Shouted Pippin.
Where's the water?
I don't keep water in my pockets.
Said Frodo.
We thought you had gone to find some.
Said Pippin, busy setting out the food in cups.
You had better go now. You can come too.
Said Frodo.
And bring all the water bottles.
There was a stream at the foot of the hill. They filled their bottles, and the small camping kettle at a little fall where the water fell, a few feet over an outcrop of grey stone. It was icy cold, and they spluttered and puffed as they bathed their faces and hands. When their breakfast was over, and their packs all trussed up again, it was after 10 o'clock, and the day was beginning to turn fine and hot. They went down the slope and across the stream where it divided under the road, and up the next slope, and up and down another shoulder of the hills, and by that time their cloaks, blankets, water, food, and other gear already seemed a heavy burden. The day's march promised to be warm and tiring work. After some miles, however, the road ceased to roll up and down. It climbed to the top of a steep bank in a weary, zigzagging sort of way, and then prepared to go down for the last time. In front of them, they saw the lower land, dotted with small clumps of trees that melted away in the distance to a brown woodland haze. They were looking across the woody end towards the Brandywine River. The road wound away before them like a piece of string.
The roads go on forever,
said Pippin.
but I can't without rest. It's high time for lunch.
He sat down on the bank at the side of the road and looked away east into the haze, beyond which lay the river and the end of the Shire in which he had spent all his life. Sam stood by him. His round eyes were wide open, for he was looking across lands he had never seen, to a new horizon.
Do elves live in those woods?
He asked.
Not that I've ever heard.
Said Pippin. Frodo was silent. He too was gazing eastward along the road, as if he had never seen it before. Suddenly he spoke, aloud but as if to himself, saying slowly,
The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow, if I can. Pursuing it with weary feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet. Whither then, cannot say. That sounds a bit like old Bilbo's rhyming,
said Pippin.
or is it one of your imitations? It does not sound altogether encouraging.
I don't know, said Frodo.
It came to me then as if I was making it up, but I may have heard it long ago. Certainly it reminds me very much of Bilbo in the last years, before he went away. He used to often say that there was only one road, and it was like a great river. Its springs were at every doorstep, and every path was its tributary. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door, he used to say. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. Do you realize that this is the very path that goes through Mirkwood, and if you let it, might take you to the Lonely Mountain, or even further and to worse places? He used to say that on the path outside the front door at Bag End, especially after he had been out for a long walk. Well, the road won't sweep me anywhere for an hour at least,
said Pippin, unslinging his pack. The others followed his example, putting their packs against the bank and their legs out into the road. After a rest, they had a good lunch, and then more rest. The sun was beginning to get low, and the light afternoon was on the land as they went down the hill. So far they had not met a soul on the road. This way was not much used, being hardly fit for carts, and there was little traffic to the woody end. They had been jogging along again for an hour or more, when Sam stopped for a moment as if listening. They were now on level ground, and the road after much winding lay straight ahead through grassland sprinkled with tall trees, outliers of the approaching woods.
I can hear a pony or a horse coming along the road behind,
said Sam. They looked back, but the turn of the road prevented them from seeing far.
I wonder if that's Gandalf coming after us.
But even as he said it, he had a feeling that it was not so, and a sudden desire to hide from the view of the rider came over him.
It may not matter much,
he said apologetically,
but I would rather not be seen on the road by anyone. I'm sick of my doings being noticed and discussed. And if it is Gandalf,
he added as an afterthought,
we can give him a little surprise to pay him out for being so late. Let's get out of sight.
The other two ran quickly to the left and down into a little hollow not far from the road. There they lay flat. Frodo hesitated for a second. Curiosity or some other feeling was struggling with his desire to hide. The sound of hoofs drew nearer. Just in time, he threw himself down in a patch of long grass behind the tree that overshadowed the road. Then he lifted his head and peered cautiously above one of the great doors. Round the corner came a black horse. No hobbit pony, but a full-sized horse. And on it sat a large man who seemed to crouch in the saddle, wrapped in a great black cloak and hood, so that only his boots and the high stirrups showed below. His face was shadowed and invisible. When it reached the tree and was level with Frodo, the horse stopped. The riding figure sat quite still with his head bowed, as if listening. From inside the hood came a noise as of someone sniffing to catch an elusive scent. The head turned from side to side of the road. A sudden, unreasoning fear of discovery laid hold on Frodo, and he thought of his ring. He hardly dared to breathe, and yet the desire to get it out of his pocket became so strong that he began slowly to move his hand. He felt that he had only to slip it on, and he would be safe. The advice of Gandalf had seemed absurd. Bilbo had used the ring, and I am still in the Shire, he thought, as his hand touched the chain on which it hung. At that moment the rider sat up and shook the reins. The horse stepped forward, walking slowly at first, and then breaking into a quick trot. Frodo crawled out to the edge of the road and watched the rider until he dwindled into the distance. He could not be quite sure, but it seemed to him that suddenly, before it passed out of sight, the horse turned aside and went into the trees on the right.
Well, I call that very queer, and indeed disturbing,
said Frodo to himself as he walked towards his companions. Pippin and Sam had remained flat in the grass, and had seen nothing, so Frodo described the rider and his strange behaviour.
I can't say why, but I felt certain he was looking or smelling for me. And also I felt certain that I did not want him to discover me. I've never seen or felt anything like it in the Shire before.
But what has one of the big people got to do with us?
Said Pippin.
And what is he doing in this part of the world?
There are some men about,
said Frodo.
Down in the South Farthing they have had trouble with big people, I believe. But I have never heard of anything like this rider. I wonder where he comes from.
Begging your pardon,
put in Sam suddenly.
But I know where he comes from.
It's from Hobbiton that this here Black Rider comes, unless there's more than one, and I know where he's going to.
What do you mean?
Said Frodo sharply, looking at him in astonishment.
Why didn't you speak up before?
I've only just remembered it, sir. It was like this. When I got back to our hole yesterday evening with the key, my dad, he says to me, "Hello, Sam," he says. "I thought you might be away with Mr. Frodo this morning. There's been a strange customer asking for Mr. Baggins of Bag End. He's only just gone. I've sent him to Bucklebury. Not that I like the sound of him. He seemed mighty put out when I told him Mr. Baggins had left his old home for good. Hissed at me, he did. It gave me quite a shudder."
What sort of a fellow was he?
Says I to the gaffer. "I don't know," says he, "but he wasn't a hobbit. He was tall and black-like, and he stooped over me. I reckon it was one of the big folk from foreign parts. He spoke funny." I couldn't stay to hear more, sir, since you were waiting. I didn't give much heed to it myself. The gaffer is getting old, and more than a bit blind. And it must have been near dark when this fellow came up the hill, and I found him taking the air at the end of our row. I hope he hasn't done no harm, sir, nor me.
The gaffer can't be blamed anyway,
said Frodo.
As a matter of fact, I heard him talking to a stranger who seemed to be inquiring for me, and I nearly went to ask him who it was. I wish I had, or you had told me about it before. I might have been more careful on the road.
Still, there may be no connection between the rider and the gaffer's stranger,
said Pippin.
We left Hobbiton secretly enough, and I don't see how he could have followed us.
But what about the smelling, sir?
Said Sam.
And the gaffer said he was a black chap.
I wish I had waited for Gandalf,
Frodo muttered.
But perhaps it would only have made matters worse.
Then you know or guess something about this rider,
said Pippin, who had caught the muttered words.
I don't know, and I would rather not guess,
said Frodo.
All right, Cousin Frodo. You can keep your secret for the present if you want to be mysterious. In the meanwhile, what are we to do? I should like a bite and a sup, but somehow I think we had better move on from here. Your talk of sniffing riders with invisible noses has unsettled me.
Yes, I think we will move on now,
said Frodo.
But not on the road, in case the rider comes back, or another follows him.
We ought to do a good step more today.
Buckland is still miles away.
The shadows of the trees were long and thin on the grass as they started off again. They now kept the stone's throw to the left of the road, and kept out of sight of it as much as they could. This hindered them, for the grass was thick and tussocky, and the ground uneven, and the trees began to draw together into thickets. The sun had gone down red behind the hills at their backs, and evening was coming on before they came back to the road at the end of the long level over which it had run straight for some miles. At that point it bent left, and went down into the lowlands of the Yale, making for Stock. But a lane branched right, winding through a road of ancient oak trees on its way to Woodhall.
That is the way for us,
said Frodo. Not far from the road meeting, they came on the huge hulk of a tree. It was still alive and had leaves on the small branches that it had put out round the broken stumps of its long fallen limbs. But it was hollow, and could be entered by a great crack on the side away from the road. The hobbits crept inside, and sat there upon the floor of old leaves and decayed wood. They rested and had a light meal, talking quietly and listening from time to time. Twilight was about them as they crept back into the lane. The west wind was sighing in the branches. Leaves were whispering. Soon the road began to fall gently, but steadily, into the dusk. A star came out above the trees in the darkening east before them. They went abreast and in step to keep up their spirits. After a time, as the stars grew thicker and brighter, the feeling of disquiet left them, and they no longer listened for the sound of hoofs. They began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing as they walk along, especially when they are drawing near to home at night. With most hobbits, it is a supper song or a bed song, but these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed.
Hush,
said Frodo.
I think I hear hooves again.
They stopped suddenly and stood as silent as tree shadows, listening. There was a sound of hoofs in the lane, some way behind, but coming slow and clear down the wind. Quickly and quietly they slipped off the path and ran into the deeper shade under the oak trees.
Don't let us go too far,
said Frodo.
I don't want to be seen, but I want to see if this is another Black Rider.
Very well, said Pippin.
But don't forget the sniffing.
The hoofs drew nearer. They had no time to find any hiding place better than the general darkness under the trees. Sam and Pippin crouched behind a large tree bole, while Frodo crept back a few yards towards the lane. It showed grey and pale, a line of fading light through the wood. Above it the stars were thick in the dim sky, but there was no moon. The sound of hoofs stopped. As Frodo watched, he saw something dark pass across the lighter space between two trees, and then halt. It looked like the black shade of a horse, led by a smaller black shadow. The black shadow stood close to the point where they had left the path, and it swayed from side to side. Frodo thought he heard the sound of snuffling. The shadow bent to the ground, and then began to crawl towards him. Once more the desire to slip on the ring came over Frodo, but this time it was stronger than before. So strong that almost before he realized what he was doing, his hand was groping in his pocket. But at that moment there came a sound like mingled song and laughter. Clear voices rose and fell in the starlit air. The black shadow straightened up and retreated. It climbed on the shadowy horse and seemed to vanish across the lane into the darkness on the other side. Frodo breathed again.
Elves!
Exclaimed Sam in a hoarse whisper.
Elves, sir!
He would have burst out of the trees and dashed off towards the voices if they had not pulled him back.
Yes, it is elves,
said Frodo.
One can meet them sometimes in the woody end, but they wander into it in spring and autumn, out of their own lands away beyond the Tower Hills. I'm thankful that they do. You did not see, but that Black Rider stopped just here and was actually crawling towards us when the song began. As soon as he heard the voices, he slipped away. What about the elves?
Said Sam, too excited to trouble about the rider.
Can't we go and see them? Listen. They're coming this way,
said Frodo.
We have only to wait.
The singing drew nearer. One clear voice rose now above the others. It was singing in the fair elven tongue, of which Frodo knew only a little, and the others knew nothing. Yet the sound, blending with the melody, seemed to shape itself in their thought into words which they only partly understood. This was the song as Frodo heard it. Snow white, O lady clear, O queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here, amid the world of woven trees. Gilthorniel, O Elbereth, clear are thy eyes, and bright thy breath. Snow white, we sing to thee in a far land beyond the sea. O stars in the sunless year, with shining hand by her were sown. In windy fields now bright and clear, we see your silver blossom blown. O Elbereth Gilthonian, we still remember we who dwell in this far land beneath the trees, thy starlight on the western seas. The song ended.
These are high elves. They spoke the name of Elbereth,
said Frodo in amazement.
Few of the fairest folk are ever seen in the Shire. Not many now remain in Middle-earth, east of the Great Sea. This is indeed a strange chance.
The hobbits sat in shadow by the wayside. Before long, the elves came down the lane towards the valley. They passed slowly, and the hobbits could see the starlight glimmering on their hair and in their eyes. They bore no lights, yet as they walked, a shimmer, like the light of the moon above the rim of the hills before it rises, seemed to fall about their feet. They were now silent, and as the last elf passed, he turned and looked towards the hobbits and laughed.
Hail, Frodo!
He cried.
You are abroad late. Or are you perhaps lost?
Then he called aloud to the others, and all the company stopped and gathered round.
This is indeed wonderful,
They said.
3 hobbits in a wood at night. We have not seen such a thing since Bilbo went away. What is the meaning of it?
The meaning of it, fair people,
Said Frodo.
is simply that we seem to be going the same way as you are. I like walking under the stars, but I would welcome your company.
We have no need for other company, and hobbits are so dull.
They laughed.
And how do you know that we go the same way as you, for you do not know whither we are going?
And how do you know my name?
Asked Frodo in return.
We know many things.
They said.
We have seen you often before with Bilbo, though you may not have seen us.
Who are you, and who is your lord?
Asked Frodo.
I am Gildor,
Answered their leader, the elf who had first hailed him.
Gildor Inglorian of the House of Finrod. We are exiles, and most of our kindred have long ago departed, and we too are now only tarrying here a while, ere we return over the great sea. But some of our kinsfolk dwell still in peace in Rivendell. Come now, Frodo. Tell us what you are doing, for we see that there is some shadow of fear upon you. All wise people!
Interrupted Pippin eagerly.
Tell us about the Black Riders.
Black Riders? They said in low voices.
Why do you ask about Black Riders? Because 2 Black Riders have overtaken us today. Or one has done so twice.
Said Pippin.
Only a little while ago he slipped away as you drew near.
The elves did not answer at once, but spoke together softly in their own tongue. At length Gildor turned to the hobbits.
We will not speak of this here,
he said.
We think you had best come now with us. It is not our custom, but for this time we will take you on your road, and you shall lodge with us tonight if you will. Oh, fair folk! This is good fortune beyond my hope,
said Pippin. Sam was speechless.
I thank you indeed, Gildor Inglorian,
said Frodo, bowing.
Elen sila lumen, omentielve. Our star shines on the hour of our meeting,
he added in high elven speech.
Be careful, friends,
cried Gildor, laughing.
Speak no secrets. Here is a scholar in the ancient tongue. Bilbo was a good master. Hail, elf friend,
he said, bowing to Frodo.
Come now with your friends and join our company. You had best walk in the middle so that you may not stray. You may be weary before we halt.
Why, where are you going?
Asked Frodo.
For tonight we shall go to the woods on the hills above Woodhall. It is some miles, but you shall have rest at the end of it, and it will shorten your journey tomorrow.
They now marched on again in silence, and passed like shadows and faint lights. For elves, even more than hobbits, could walk when they wished without sound or footfall. Pippin soon began to feel sleepy, and staggered once or twice, but each time a tall elf at his side put out his arm and saved him from a fall. Sam walked along Frodo's side, as if in a dream, with an expression on his face, half of fear and half of astonished joy. The woods on either side became denser. The trees were now younger and thicker, and as the lane went lower, running down into a fold of the hills, there were many deep breaks of hazel on the rising slopes at either hand. At last the elves turned aside from the path. A green ride lay almost unseen through the thickets on the right, and this they followed as it would, away back up the wooded slopes on the top of a shoulder of the hills that stood out into the lower land of the river valley. Suddenly they came out of the shadow of the trees, and beyond them lay a wide space of grass, grey under the night. On 3 sides the woods pressed upon it, but eastward the ground fell steeply, and the tops of the dark trees, growing at the bottom of the slope, were below their feet. Beyond, the low lands lay dim and flat under the stars. Nearer at hand, a few lights twinkled in the village of Woodhall. The elves sat on the grass and spoke together in soft voices. They seemed to take no further notice of the hobbits. Frodo and his companions wrapped themselves in cloaks and blankets, and drowsiness stole over them. The night grew on, and the lights in the valley went out. Pippin fell asleep, pillowed on a green hillock. Away high in the east swung Remirath, the netted stars, and slowly above the mists, red Borgil rose, glowing like a jewel of fire. Then, by some shift of airs, all the mists was drawn away like a veil, and there leaned up, as he climbed over the rim of the world, the swordsman of the sky, Menelvagor with his shining belt. The elves all burst into song. Suddenly under the trees a fire sprang up with a red light.
Come,
The elves called to the hobbits.
come! Now is the time for speech and merriment.
Pippin sat up and rubbed his eyes. He shivered,
There is a fire in the hall, and food for hungry guests.
said an elf standing before him. At the south end of the greensward there was an opening. There the green floor ran into the wood, and formed a wide space like a hall, roofed by the boughs of trees. Their great trunks ran like pillars down each side. In the middle there was a wood fire blazing, and upon the tree pillars torches with lights of gold and silver were burning steadily. The elves sat round the fire upon the grass, or upon the sawn rings of old trunks. Some went to and fro bearing cups and pouring drink. Others brought food on heaped plates and dishes.
Well, this is poor fare,
They said to the hobbits.
for we are lodging in the greensward far from our halls.
If ever you are our guests at home, we will treat you better.
It seems to me good enough for a birthday party.
Said Frodo. Pippin afterwards recalled little of either food or drink, for his mind was filled with the light upon the elf faces, and the sound of voices so various and so beautiful that he felt in a waking dream. But he remembered that there was bread, surpassing the savour of a fair white loaf to one who is starving, and fruits sweet as wild berries, and richer than the tended fruits of gardens. He drained a cup that was filled with fragrant draught, cool as a clear fountain, golden as a summer afternoon. Sam could never describe in words, nor picture clearly to himself, what he felt or thought that night, though it remained in his memory as one of the chief events of his life. The nearest he ever got was to say,
Well, sir, if I could grow apples like that, I would call myself a gardener. But it was the singing that went to my heart, if you know what I mean.
Frodo sat, eating, drinking and talking with delight, but his mind was chiefly on the words spoken. He knew a little of the elf speech and listened eagerly. Now and again he spoke to those that served him and thanked them in their own language. They smiled at him and said, laughing.
Here is a jewel among hobbits.
After a while Pippin fell fast asleep, and was lifted up and borne away to a bower under the trees. There he was laid upon a soft bed, and slept the rest of the night away. Sam refused to leave his master. When Pippin had gone, he came and sat curled up at Frodo's feet, where at last he nodded and closed his eyes. Frodo remained long awake, talking with Gildor. They spoke of many things, old and new, and Frodo questioned Gildor much about happenings in the wide world outside of the Shire. The tidings were mostly sad and ominous, of gathering darkness, the wars of men, and the flight of the elves. At last Frodo asked the question that was nearest to his heart.
Tell me, Gildor, have you ever seen Bilbo since he left us?
Gildor smiled. Yes, he answered.
Twice. He said farewell to us on this very spot.
But I saw him once again, far from here. He would say no more about Bilbo, and Frodo fell silent. You do not ask me or tell me much that concerns yourself, Frodo, said Gildor. But I already know a little.
and I can read more in your face and in the thought behind your questions. You are leaving the Shire, and yet you doubt that you will find what you seek, or accomplish what you intend, or that you will ever return. Is that not so?
It is,
said Frodo.
but I thought my going was a secret known only to Gandalf and my faithful Sam.
He looked down at Sam, who was snoring gently. The secret will not reach the enemy from us, said Gildor.
The enemy?
Said Frodo.
Then you know why I'm leaving the Shire.
I do not know what reason the enemy is pursuing you, answered Gildor, but I perceive that he is. Strange indeed though that seems to me, and I warn you that peril is now both before you and behind you, and upon either side.
You mean the Riders? I fear that they were servants of the enemy. What are the Black Riders?
Has Gandalf told you nothing?
Nothing about such creatures.
Then I think it is not for me to say more, lest terror should keep you from your journey. For it seems to me that you have set out only just in time, if indeed you are in time. You must now make haste, and neither stay nor turn back, for the Shire is no longer any protection to you.
I cannot imagine what information would be more terrifying than your hints and warnings,
exclaimed Frodo.
I knew that danger lay ahead, of course, but I did not expect to meet it in our own Shire. Can't a hobbit walk from the water to the river in peace?
But it is not your own Shire, said Gildor. Others dwelt there before hobbits were, and others will dwell there again when hobbits are no more. The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out.
I know, and yet it has always seemed so safe and familiar. What can I do now? My plan was to leave the Shire secretly and make my way to Rivendell, but now my footsteps are dogged before I ever get to Buckland.
I think you should still follow that plan, said Gildor. I do not think the road will prove too hard for your courage, but if you desire clearer counsel, you should ask Gandalf. I do not know the reason for your flight. These things Gandalf must know. I suppose that you will see him before you leave the Shire?
I hope so, but that is another thing that makes me anxious. I've been expecting Gandalf for many days. He was to have come to Hobbiton at the latest 2 nights ago, but he has never appeared. Now I am wondering what can have happened. Should I wait for him?
Gildor was silent for a moment. I do not like this news, he said at last. That Gandalf would be late does not bode well. But it is said, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. The choice is yours, to go or wait.
And it is also said,
answered Frodo,
go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both no and yes.
Is it indeed? Laughed Gildor. Elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift, even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill. But what would you do? You have not told me all concerning yourself, and how then shall I choose better than you? But if you demand advice, I will for friendship's sake give it. I think you should now go at once, without delay, and if Gandalf does not come before you set out, then I also advise this. Do not go alone. Take such friends as are trusty and willing. Now you should be grateful, for I do not give this counsel gladly. The elves have their own labours and their own sorrows, and they are little concerned with the ways of hobbits, or of any other creatures upon earth. Our paths cross theirs seldom, by chance or purpose. In this meeting there may be more than chance, but the purpose is not clear to me, and I fear to say too much.
I am deeply grateful,
said Frodo.
But I wish you could tell me plainly what the Black Riders are. If I take your advice, I may not see Gandalf for a long while, and I ought to know what is the danger that pursues me.
Is it not enough to know that they are servants of the enemy? Answered Gildor. Flee them! Speak no words to them! They are deadly. Ask no more of me, but my heart forebodes that, ere all is ended, you, Frodo, son of Drogo, will know more of these fell things than Gildor and Glorian. May Elbereth protect you.
But where shall I find courage?
Asked Frodo.
That is what I chiefly need.
Courage is found in unlikely places, said Gildor. Be of good hope. Sleep now. In the morning we shall have gone, but we will send our messages through the lands. The wandering companies shall know of your journey, and those that have power for good shall be on the watch. I name you Elf Friend, and may the stars shine upon the end of your road. Seldom have we had such delight in strangers, and it is fair to hear words of the ancient speech from the lips of other wanderers in the world. Frodo felt sleep coming upon him, even as Gildor finished speaking. I will sleep now, he said, and the elf led him to a bower beside Pippin. And he threw himself upon a bed and fell at once into a dreamless slumber. In the morning, Frodo woke refreshed. He was lying in a bower made by a living tree with branches laced and drooping to the ground. His bed was of fern and grass, deep and soft, and strangely fragrant. The sun was shining through the fluttered leaves, which were still green upon the tree. He jumped up and went out. Sam was sitting on the grass near the edge of the wood. Pippin was standing, studying the sky and weather. There was no sign of the elves.
They have left us food and drink and bread, said Pippin. Come and have your breakfast. The bread tastes almost as good as it did last night. I did not want to leave you any, but Sam insisted.
Frodo sat down beside Sam and began to eat.
So, what is the plan for today? Asked Pippin.
To walk to Bucklebury as quick as possible, answered Frodo, and gave his attention to the food.
Do you think we should see anything of those riders?
Asked Pippin cheerfully. Under the morning sun, the prospect of seeing a whole troop of them did not seem very alarming to him.
Yes, probably, said Frodo, not liking the reminder. But I hope to get across the river without their seeing us. Did you find out anything about them from Gildor?
Not much, only hints and riddles, said Frodo evasively.
Did you ask about the sniffing?
We didn't discuss it, said Frodo, with his mouth full.
You should have. I'm sure it is very important. In that case, I'm sure Gildor would have refused to explain it, said Frodo sharply. And now, leave me in peace for a bit. I don't want to answer a string of questions while I'm eating. I want to think. Good heavens, said Pippin. At breakfast?
He walked away towards the edge of the green. From Frodo's mind, the bright morning, treacherously bright, he thought, had not banished the fear of pursuit, and he pondered the words of Gildor. The merry voice of Pippin came to him. He was running on the green turf and singing. No, I could not, he said to himself. It is one thing to take my young friends walking over the Shire with me until we are hungry and weary, and food and bed are sweet. To take them into exile, where hunger and weariness may have no cure, is quite another, even if they are willing to come. The inheritance is mine alone. I don't think I ought even to take Sam. He looked at Sam Gamgee, and discovered that Sam was watching him.
Well, Sam, he said, what about it? I'm leaving the Shire as soon as ever I can. In fact, I have made up my mind now not even to wait a day at Crickhollow, if it can be helped.
Very good, sir.
You mean still to come with me?
I do. It's going to be very dangerous, Sam. It's already dangerous. Most likely neither of us will come back. If you don't come back, sir, then I shan't. That's certain, said Sam. Don't you leave him, they said to me. Leave him, I said. I never mean to. I'm going with him. If he climbs to the moon, and if any of those black riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with, I said. They laughed.
Who are they, and what are you talking about?
The elves, sir. We had some talk last night, and they seemed to know you were going away, so I didn't see the use of denying it. Wonderful folk, elves, sir. Wonderful.
They are, said Frodo. Do you like them still now that you've had a closer view?
They seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak, answered Sam slowly. It don't seem to matter what I think about them. They are quite different from what I expected. So old and young, and so gay and sad, as it were.
Frodo looked at Sam rather startled, half expecting to see some outward sign of the odd change that seemed to have come over him. It did not sound like the voice of the old Sam Gamgee that he thought he knew, but it looked like the old Sam Gamgee sitting there, except that his face was unusually thoughtful. "Do you feel any need to leave the Shire now that your wish to see them has come true already?" he asked.
Yes, sir. I don't know how to say it, but after last night, I feel different. I seem to see ahead, in a kind of way. I know we're going to take a very long road into darkness, but I know I can't turn back. It isn't to see elves now, nor dragons, nor mountains that I want. I don't rightly know what I want, but I have something to do before the end. And it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir, if you understand me.
"I don't altogether, but I understand that Gandalf chose me a good companion. I am content. We will go together." Frodo finished his breakfast in silence. Then, standing up, he looked over the land ahead and called to Pippin.
Pippin!
"All ready to start," he said as Pippin ran up. "We must be getting off at once. We slept late, and there are a good many miles to go."
You slept late, you mean, said Pippin. I was up long before, and we're only waiting for you to finish eating and thinking.
I have finished both now, and I'm going to make for Buckleberry Ferry as quickly as possible. I'm not going out of the way. Back to the road we left last night, I'm going to cut straight across country from here." "Then you're going to fly," said Pippin. "You won't cut straight on foot anywhere in this country." "Well, we can cut straighter than the road anyway," answered Frodo. "The ferry is east from Woodhall, but the hard road curves away to the left. You can see a bend of it away north over there. It goes around the north end of the marsh, so as to strike the causeway from the bridge above the stock, but that is miles out of the way. We could save the quarter of the distance if we made a line to the ferry from where we stand." "Shortcuts make long delays," argued Pippin. "The country's rough ground here, and there are bogs and all kinds of difficulties down in the marish. I know the land in these parts, and if you're worrying about the Black Riders, I can't see that it is any worse meeting them on a road than in a wood or a field." "It is less easy to find people in the woods and fields," answered Frodo. "And if you're supposed to be on the road, there is some chance that you will be looked for on the road and not off it." "All right," said Pippin. "I will follow you into every bog and ditch, but it is hard. I had counted on passing the Golden Perch at Stock before sundown. The best beer in the East Farthing. Or it used to be. It's a long time since I tasted it." "That settles it," said Frodo. "Shortcuts make delays, but inns make longer ones. At all costs we must keep you away from the Golden Perch. We want to get to Buckleberry Ferry before dark. What do you say, Sam?"
I will go along with you, Mr. Frodo,
said Sam, in spite of private misgiving and a deep regret for the best beer in the East Farthing. "Then if we are going to toil through bog and briar, let's go now," said Pippin. It was already nearly as hot as it had been the days before, but clouds were beginning to come up from the west. It looked likely to turn to rain. The hobbits scrambled down a steep green bank and plunged into the thick trees below. Their course had been chosen to leave Woodhall to the left, and to cut slanting through the woods that clustered along the eastern side of the hills until they reached the flats beyond. Then they could make straight for the ferry, over the country that was open, except for a few ditches and fences. Frodo reckoned they had 18 miles to go in a straight line. He soon found that the thicket was closer and more tangled than it had appeared. There were no paths in the undergrowth, and they did not get on very fast. When they had struggled to the bottom of the bank, they found a stream running down from the hills behind it in a deeply dug bed with steep, slippery slides overhung with brambles. Most inconveniently, it cut across the line they had chosen. They could not jump over it, nor indeed get across it at all without getting wet, scratched, and muddy. They halted, wondering what to do. "First check," said Pippin, smiling grimly. Sam Gamgee looked back. Through an opening in the trees he caught a glimpse of the top of the green bank upon which they had climbed down. "Look!" he said, clutching Frodo by the arm. They all looked, and on the edge high above them they saw against the sky a horse standing. Beside it stooped a black figure. They at once gave up any idea of going back. Frodo led the way, and plunged quickly into the thick bushes behind the stream. "Phew!" he said to Pippin. "We were both right.
The shortcut has gone crooked already. But we got under convoy only just in time. You've got sharp ears, Sam. Can you hear anything coming?
They stood still, almost holding their breath as they listened, but there was no sound of pursuit.
I don't fancy he would try bringing his horse down that bank, said Sam. But I guess he knows we came down it. We had better be going on.
Going on was not altogether easy. They had packs to carry, and the bushes and brambles were reluctant to let them through. They were cut off from the wind by the ridge behind, and the air was still and stuffy. When they forced their way at last into a more open ground, they were hot and tired and very scratched, and they were also no longer certain of the direction in which they were going. The banks of the stream sank as it reached the levels and became broader and shallower, wandering off towards the Marish and the river.
Why, this is Stockbrook, said Pippin. If we are going to try and get back onto our course, we must cross at once and bear right.
They waded the stream and hurried over a wide open space, rush-grown and treeless, on the further side. Beyond that they came again to a belt of trees, tall oaks for the most part, with here and there an elm tree or an ash. The ground was fairly level, and there was little undergrowth, but the trees were too close for them to see far ahead. The leaves blew upwards in the sudden gusts of wind, and spots of rain began to fall from the overcast sky. Then the wind died away, and the rain came streaming down. They trudged along as fast they could, over patches of grass, and through thick drifts of old leaves, and all about them the rain pattered and trickled. They did not talk, but kept glancing back, and from side to side. After half an hour, Pippin said,
I hope we have not turned too much towards the south, and are not walking longwise through this wood. It's not a very broad belt. I should have said no more than a mile at the widest, and we ought to have been through it by now. It is no good our starting to go in zigzags, said Frodo. It won't mend matters. Let's just keep on as we are going. I'm not sure that I want to come out in the open yet.
They went on for perhaps another couple of miles. The sun gleamed out of ragged clouds again, and the rain lessened. It was now past midday, and they felt it was high time for lunch. They halted under an elm tree. Its leaves, though fast turning yellow, were still thick, and the ground at its feet was fairly dry and sheltered. When they came to make their meal, they found that the elves had filled their bottles with a clear drink, pale golden in colour. It had the scent of a honey made of many flowers, and was wonderfully refreshing. Very soon they were laughing and snapping their fingers at rain, and at black riders. The last few miles, they felt, would soon be behind them. Frodo propped his back against the tree trunk and closed his eyes. Sam and Pippin sat near, and they began to hum, and then to sing softly.
Ho, ho, to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go. But under a tall tree I will lie, and let the clouds go sailing by. Ho, 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 to the bottle I go.
They began again louder. They stopped short suddenly. Frodo sprang to his feet. A long-drawn wail came down the wind, like a cry of some evil and lonely creature. It rose and fell, and ended on a high, piercing note. Even as they sat and stood, as if suddenly frozen, it was answered by another cry, fainter and further off, but no less chilling to the blood. There was then a silence, broken only by the sound of the wind in the leaves.
And what do you think that was?
Pippin asked at last, trying to speak lightly, but quavering a little.
If it was a bird, it was one that I've never heard in the Shire before.
It was not a bird or beast, said Frodo. It was a call, or a signal. There were words in that cry, though I could not catch them, but no hobbit has such a voice. No more was said about it. They were all thinking of the riders, but no one spoke of them. They were now reluctant either to stay or go on, but sooner or later they had got to get across the open country, to the ferry, and it was best to go sooner and in daylight. In a few moments they had shouldered their packs again and were off. Before long the wood came to a sudden end. Wide grasslands stretched before them. They now saw that they had, in fact, turned too much to the south. Away over the flats they could glimpse the low hill of Bucklebury across the river, but it was now to their left, Creeping cautiously out of the edge of the trees, they set off across the open as quickly as they could. At first they felt afraid, away from the shelter of the wood. Far back behind them stood the high place where they had breakfasted. Frodo half expected to see the small, distant figure of a horseman on the bridge dark against the sky, but there was no sign of one. The sun escaping from the breaking clouds as it sank towards the hills they had left was now shining brightly again. Their fear left them, though they still felt uneasy. But the land became steadily more tame and well-ordered. Soon they came to well-tended fields and meadows. There were hedges and gates and dikes for drainage. Everything seemed quiet and peaceful, just an ordinary corner of the Shire. Their spirits rose with every step. The line of the river grew nearer, and the Black Riders began to seem like phantoms of the woods now left far behind. They passed along the edge of a huge turnip field and came to a stout gate. Beyond it a rutted lane ran between low, well-laid hedges towards a distant clump of trees. Pippin stopped. "I know these fields and this gate," he said. "This is Barfurlong, old Farmer Maggot's land. And that's his farm away there in the trees." "One trouble after another," said Frodo, looking nearly as much alarmed as if Pippin had declared the lane was the slot leading to a dragon's den. The others looked at him in surprise. "What's wrong with old Maggot?" asked Pippin. "He's a good friend to all the Brandybucks. Of course he's a terror to trespassers and keeps ferocious dogs. But after all, folk down here are near the border and have to be more on their guard." "I know," said Frodo. "But all the same," he added with a shameful laugh, "I'm terrified of him and his dogs. I've avoided this farm for years and years. He caught me several times trespassing after mushrooms when I was a youngster in Bradley Hall. On the last occasion he beat me and then took me and then showed me to his dogs. 'See, lads,' he said, 'next time this young varmint sets foot on my land, you can eat him. Now see him off.' They chased me all the way to the ferry. I have never gotten over the fright, though I dare say the beasts knew their business and would not really have touched me." Pippin laughed. "Well, it's time you made it up, especially if you're coming back to live in Buckland. Old Maggot's really a stout fellow, if you leave his mushrooms alone. Let's get into the lane, and then we shan't be trespassing. If we meet him, I'll do the talking. He's a friend of Mary's, and I used to come here with him a good deal at one time." They went along the lane, until they saw the thatched roofs of a large house and farm buildings peeping out among the trees ahead. The Maggots and the Puddifoots of stock, and most of the inhabitants of the Marish, were house-dwellers. And this farm was stoutly built of brick, and had a high wall all around it. There was a wide wooden gate opening out of the wall into the lane. Suddenly, as they drew nearer, a terrific baying and barking broke out, and a loud voice was heard shouting, Frodo and Sam stopped dead, but Pippin walked on a few paces. The gate opened and 3 huge dogs came pelting out of the lane and dashed towards the travellers, barking fiercely. They took no notice of Pippin, but Sam shrank against the wall, while 2 wolvish-looking dogs sniffed at him suspiciously and snarled if he moved. The largest and most ferocious of these halted in front of Frodo, bristling and growling. Through the gate there now appeared a broad, thick-set hobbit with a round red face.
"Hello, hello! And who may you be, and what may you be wanting?"
he asked. "Good afternoon, Mr. Maggot," said Pippin. The farmer looked at him closely.
"Well, if it isn't Master Pippin! Mr. Peregrine Took, I should say!"
he cried, changing from a growl to a grin.
"It's a long time since I saw you round here. It's lucky for you that I know you. I was just going to set my dogs on any strangers. There's some funny things going on today. Of course, we do get queer folk wandering in these parts at times. Too near the river," he said, shaking his head. "This fellow was most outlandish I've ever set eyes on. He won't cross my land without leave a second time. Not if I can stop it."
"What fellow do you mean?" asked Pippin.
"You haven't seen him,"
said the farmer.
"He went up the lane towards the causeway not a while back. He was a funny customer and asking funny questions, but perhaps you'll come along inside, and we'll pass the news more comfortable. I've a drop of good ale on tap if you and your friends are willing, Mr. Took."
It seemed plain that the farmer would tell them more, if allowed to do it in his own time and fashion, so they all accepted the invitation. "What about the dogs?"
asked Frodo anxiously. The farmer laughed.
They won't harm you, not unless I tell them to. Here, grip, bang, heel, he cried. Heel, wolf.
To the relief of Frodo and Sam, the dogs walked away and let them go free. Pippin introduced the other two to the farmer. Mr. Frodo Baggins, he said. You may not remember him, but he used to live at Brandyhall. At the name Baggins, the farmer started and gave Frodo a sharp glance. For a moment, Frodo thought that the memory of stolen mushrooms had been aroused and that the dogs would be told to see him off. But Farmer Maggot took him by the arm.
Well, if that isn't queerer than ever, he exclaimed. Mr. Baggins, is it? Come inside, we must have a talk.
They went into the farmer's kitchen and sat by the wide fireplace. Mrs. Maggot brought out beer in a huge jug and filled 4 large mugs. It was a good brew, and Pippin found himself more than compensated for missing the golden perch. Sam sipped his beer suspiciously. He had a natural mistrust of the inhabitants of other parts of the Shire. And also, he was not disposed to be quick friends with anyone who had beaten his master, however long ago. After a few remarks about the weather and the agricultural prospects, which were no worse than usual, put down his mug and looked at them all in turn.
Now, Mr. Peregrine, he said, where might you be coming from, and where might you be going to? Were you coming to visit me? For if so, you had gone past my gate with my seeing you.
Well, no, answered Pippin. To tell you the truth, since you have guessed it, we got into the lane from the other end. We had come over your fields, but that was quite by accident. We lost our way in the woods back near Woodhall, trying to make a shortcut to the ferry.
If you were in a hurry, the road would have served you better, said the farmer. But I wasn't worrying about that. You have leave to walk over my land if you have a mind, Mr. Peregrine. And you, Mr. Baggins, though I dare say you still like mushrooms. Ah, yes, I recognize the name. I recollect the time when young Frodo Baggins was one of the worst young rascals of Buckland. But it wasn't mushrooms I was thinking of. I just heard the name Baggins before you turned up. What do you think that funny customer asked me?
They waited anxiously for him to go on.
Well,
the farmer continued, approaching his point with slow relish.
He came riding on a big black horse at that gate, which happened to be open and right up to my door. Old Black he was himself, too, and cloaked and hooded up, as if he did not want to be known. Now what in the Shire can he want? I thought to myself. We don't see many of the big folk over the border, and anyway, I'd never heard of any like his blackfellow. Good day to you, I says, going out to him. This lane don't lead anywhere, and wherever you may be going, the quickest way will be back to the road. I didn't like the looks of him, and when Grip came out, he took one sniff and let out a yelp, as if he'd been stung. He put down his tail and bolted off howling. The black fellow sat quite still. I come from yonder, he said, slow and stiff-like, pointing back west, over my fields, if you please. Have you seen Baggins? He asked in a queer voice, bent down towards me. I could not see any face, for his hood fell down so low, and I felt a sort of shiver down my back, but I did not see why he should come riding over my land so bold. Be off, I said. There are no Bagginses here. You're in the wrong part of the Shire. You had better go back west to Hobbiton, but you can go by road this time. Baggins has left, he answered with a whisper. He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes, will you tell me? I will come back with gold. No, you won't, I said. You'll go back where you belong, double quick. I give you some minute before I call my dogs. He gave a sort of hiss. It might have been laughing, and it might not. Then he spurred his grey horse right at me, and I jumped out of the way only just in time. I called the dogs, but he swung off and rode through the gate and up the lane towards the causeway like a bolt of thunder. What do you think of that?
Frodo sat for a moment looking at the fire, but his only thought was how on earth would they reach the ferry. I don't know what to think, he said at last. Then I'll tell you what to think, said Maggot. You should never have gone mixing yourself up with Hobbiton folk, Mr. Frodo.
Folk are queer up there.
Sam stirred in his chair and looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye.
But you were always a reckless lad. When I heard you had left the brandy bucks and gone off to that old Mr. Bilbo, I said that you were going to find trouble. Mark my words, this all comes to those strange doings of Mr. Bilbo's. His money was got in some strange fashion in foreign parts, they say. Maybe there is some that want to know what has become of the golden jewels that he buried in the hill of Hobbiton, as I hear.
Frodo said nothing. The shrewd guesses of the farmer were rather disconcerting.
Well, Mr. Frodo, Margaret went on, I'm glad that you've had the sense to come back to Buckland. My advice is, stay here, and don't get mixed up with these outlandish folk. You'll have friends in these parts. If any of these blackfellows comes after you again, I'll deal with them. I'll say you're dead, or have left the Shire, or anything you like. And that might be true enough, for as like as not it is old Mr. Bilbo they want news of.
Maybe you're right, said Frodo, avoiding the farmer's eye and staring at the fire. Maggot looked at him thoughtfully.
I see you have ideas of your own, he said. It is as plain as my nose that no accident brought you and that rider here on the same afternoon. And maybe my news was no great news to you. After all, I'm not asking you to tell me anything you have in mind to keep to yourself, but I see that you are in some kind of trouble. Perhaps you are thinking it won't be too easy to get to the ferry without being caught.
I was thinking so, said Frodo. But we've got to try and get there, and it won't be done by sitting and thinking. So I'm afraid we must be going. Thank you very much indeed for your kindness. I've been in terror for you and your dogs for over 30 years, Farmer Maggot, though you may laugh to hear it. It's a pity, for I've missed a good friend, and now I'm sorry to leave you so soon. But I'll come back, perhaps one day, if I get the chance.
And you'll be welcome when you come, said Maggot. But now, I have a notion. It's clear sundown already, and we're going to have our supper, for we mostly go to bed soon after the sun. If you and Mr. Peregrine and all could stay and have a bite with us, we would be pleased.
And so would we, said Frodo. But we must be going at once, I'm afraid. Even now it will be dark before we can reach the ferry.
Wait a minute. I was going to say, after a bit of supper, I'll get out a small wagon, and I'll drive you all to the ferry. That will save you a good step, and it might also save you trouble of another sort.
Frodo now accepted the invitation gratefully, to the relief of Pippin and Sam. The sun was already behind the western hills, and the light was failing. 2 of Maggot's sons and his 3 daughters came in, and a generous supper was laid on the large table. The kitchen was lit with candles and fire was mended. Mrs. Maggot bustled in and out. 1 or 2 other hobbits belonging to the farm household came in. In a short while 14 sat down to eat. There was beer in plenty, and a mighty dish of mushrooms and bacon, besides much other solid farmhouse fare. The dogs lay by the fire and ignored rinds and cracked bones. When they had finished, the farmer and his sons went out with a lantern and got the wagon ready. It was dark in the yard when the guests came out. They threw their packs on board and climbed in. The farmer sat in the driving seat and whipped up his 2 stout ponies. His wife stood in the light of the open door.
You be careful of yourself, Maggot,
She called.
Don't go arguing with any foreigners, and come straight back.
I will,
said he, and drove out of the gate. There was now no breath of wind stirring. The night was still and quiet, and a chill was in the air. They went without lights and took it slowly. After a mile or 2 the lane came to an end, crossing a deep dike, and climbing a short slope up to the high-banked causeway. Maggot got down and took a good look either way, north and south, but nothing could be seen in the darkness, and there was not a sound in the still air. Thin strands of silver mist were hanging above the dikes and crawling over the fields.
It's going to be thick, said Maggot, but I'll not light my lantern till I turn for home. We'll hear anything on the road long before we meet it tonight.
It was 5 miles or more from Maggot's Lane to the ferry. The hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears were strained for any sound above the creak of the wheels and the slow clop of the ponies' hoofs. The wagons seemed slower than a snail to Frodo. Beside him Pippin was nodding towards sleep, but Sam was staring forwards into the rising fog. They reached the entrance to the ferry lane at last. It was marked by 2 tall white posts that suddenly loomed up on their right. Farmer Maggot drew in his ponies and the wagon creaked to a halt. They were just beginning to scramble out when suddenly they heard what they had all been dreading. Hooves on the road ahead. The sound was coming towards them. Maggot jumped down and stood holding the ponies' heads and peering forward into the gloom. Came the approaching rider. The fall of the hoofs sounded loud in the still, foggy air.
"You'd better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down in the wagon and cover it up with blankets, and we'll send this rider to the rightabouts."
He climbed out and went to the farmer's side. Black riders would have to ride over him to get near the wagon. The rider was nearly on them.
Hello there!
Called Farmer Maggot. The advancing hoofs stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark cloaked shape in the mist, a yard or 2 ahead.
Now then,
Said the farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward.
don't you come a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going? I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?
Said a muffled voice, but the voice was the voice of Mary Brandybuck. A dark lantern was uncovered, and its light fell on the astonished face of the farmer.
Oh, Mr. Merry!
He cried.
"Yes, of course. Who did you think it was?"
Said Mary, coming forward. As he came out of the mist and their fears subsided, he seemed suddenly to diminish to ordinary hobbit size. He was riding a pony, and a scarf was swathed around his neck and over his chin to keep out the fog. Frodo sprang out of the wagon to greet him.
"Hello, Mary."
So there you are at last,
Cried Mary.
I was beginning to wonder if you would turn up at all today, and I was just going back to supper. When it grew foggy, I came across and rode up towards Stock to see if you had fallen into any ditches. But I'm blessed if I knew which way you had come. Where did you find him, Mr. Maggot? In your duck pond? No, I caught him trespassing,
Said the farmer.
and nearly set my dogs on him. But they'll tell you all the story, I've no doubt. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo and all, I'd best be turning for home. Mrs. Maggot will be worrying with the night getting thick.
He backed the wagon into the lane and turned it.
Well, good night to you all,
He said,
It's been a queer day and no mistake, but all's well as ends well. Though perhaps we should not say that until we reach our own doors. I'll not deny that I'll be glad now when I do.
He lit his lanterns and got up. Suddenly he produced a large basket from under the seat.
I was nearly forgetting, he said. Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins, with her compliments.
He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light around his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushroom was rising.
"Now, we had better get home ourselves," said Mary. "There's something funny about all this, I see, but it must wait till we get in."
They turned down the ferry lane, which was straight and well kept, and edged with large whitewashed stones. In 100 yards or so it brought them to the riverbank, where there was a broad wooden landing stage. A large flat ferry boat was moored beside it. The white bollards near the water's edge glimmered in the light of 2 lamps on high posts. Behind them the mists in the flat fields were now above the hedges, but the water before them was dark. With only a few curling wisps like steam among the reeds by the bank, there seemed to be less fog on the further side. Mary led the pony over a gangway onto the ferry, and the others followed. Mary then pushed slowly off with a long pole. The Brandywine flowed slow and broad before them. On the other side the bank was steep, and up it a winding path climbed from the further landing. Lamps were twinkling there. Behind loomed up the Buck Hill, and out of it, through stray shrouds of mist, shone many round windows, yellow and red. They were the windows of Brandy Hall, the ancient home of the Brandybucks. Long ago, Gorhendad Oldbuck, head of the Old Buck family, one of the oldest in Marish, or indeed in the Shire, had crossed the river, which was the original boundary of the land eastwards. He built and excavated Brandy Hall, changed his name to Brandybuck, and settled down to become master of what was virtually a small independent country. His family grew and grew, and after his days continued to grow, until Brandy Hall occupied the whole of the low hill and had 3 large front doors, many side doors, and about 100 windows. The Brandybucks and their numerous dependents then began to burrow, and later to build all around about. That was the origin of Buckland, a thickly inhabited strip between the river and the old forest, a sort of colony from the Shire. Its chief village was Bucklebury, clustering in the banks and slopes behind the Brandy Hall. The people in the Marish were friendly with the Bucklanders, and the authority of the master of the hall, as the head of the Brandybuck family was called, was still acknowledged by the farmers between Stock and Rushy. But most of the folk of the old Shire regarded the Bucklanders as peculiar, half foreigners as it were. Though, as a matter of fact, they were not very different from the other hobbits of the Four Farthings, except in one point. They were fond of boats, and some of them could swim. Their land was originally unprotected from the east, but on that side they had built a hedge, the High Hay. It had been planted many generations ago, and was now thick and tall, for it was constantly tended. It ran all the way from Brandywine Bridge in a big loop, curving away from the river to Haysend, where the Withywindle flowed out from the forest into the Brandywine, well over 20 minutes from end to end. But, of course, it was not a complete protection. The forest drew close to the hedge in many places. The Bucklanders kept their doors locked after dark, and that also was not usual in the Shire. The ferry boat moved slowly across the water. The Buckland shore drew nearer. Sam was the only member of the party who had not been over the river before. He had a strange feeling as the slow, gurgling stream slipped by. His old life lay behind in the mists. Dark adventure lay in front. He scratched his head, and for a moment he had a passing wish that Mr. Frodo could have gone on living quietly at Bag End. The 4 hobbits stepped off the ferry. Merry was tying it up, and Pippin was already leading the pony up the path when Sam, who had been looking back as if to take farewell of the Shire, said in a hoarse whisper,
"Look back, Mr. Frodo. Do you see anything?"
On the far stage, under the distant lamps, they could just make out a figure. It looked like a dark black bundle left behind, but as they looked, it seemed to move and sway this way and that, as if searching the ground. It then crawled, or went crouching, back into the gloom beyond the lamps.
"What in the Shire was that?"
exclaimed Merry.
"Something that was following us," said Frodo. "But don't ask any more now. Let's get away at once."
They hurried up the path to the top of the bank, but when they looked back, the far shore was shrouded in mist, and nothing could be seen.
"Thank goodness you don't keep any boats on the west bank," said Frodo. Can horses cross the river?"
"They can go 20 miles north of the Brandywine Bridge, or they might swim," answered Merry. "Though I never heard of any horse swimming on the Brandywine. But what have horses to do with it?"
"I'll tell you later. Let's get indoors and then we can talk."
"All right. You and Pippin know your way, so I'll just ride on and tell Fatty Bolger that you're coming. We'll see about supper and things."
"We had our supper early with Farmer Maggot," said Frodo. "But we could do with another."
"You shall have it. Give me that basket,"
said Merry, and rode ahead into the darkness. It was some distance from the Brandywine to Frodo's new house at Crickhollow. They passed Buck Hill and Brandy Hole on their left, and on the outskirts of Bucklebury struck the main road of Buckland that ran south from the bridge. Half a mile northward along this they came to a lane opening on their right. This they followed for a couple of miles as it climbed up and down into the country. At last they came to a narrow gate in a thick hedge. Nothing could be seen of the house in the dark. It stood back from the lane in the middle of a wide circle of lawn, surrounded by a belt of low trees inside the outer hedge. Frodo had chosen it, because it stood in an out-of-the-way corner of the country, and there were no other dwellings close by. You could get in and out without being noticed. It had been built a long while before by the Brandybucks,
for the use of guests or members of the family that wished to escape from the crowded life of Brandy Hall for a time. It was an old-fashioned countrified house, as much like a hobbit hole as possible. It was long and low, with no upper story, and it had a roof of turf, round windows, and a large round door. As they walked up the green path from the gate, no light was visible. The windows were dark and shuttered. Frodo knocked on the door, and Fatty Bolger opened it. A friendly light streamed out. They slipped in quickly, and shut themselves in the light inside. They were in a wide hall with doors on either side. In front of them a passage ran back down the middle of the house.
Well, what do you think of it?
Asked Merry, coming up the passage.
We've done our best in a short time to make it look like home. After all, Fatty and I only got here with the last cartload yesterday.
Frodo looked around. It did look like home. Many of his own favorite things, or Bilbo's things, that reminded him sharply of him in their new setting, were arranged as nearly as possible as they had been at Bag End. It was a pleasant, comfortable, welcoming place, and he found himself wishing that he was really coming here to settle down in quiet retirement. It seemed unfair to have put his friends to all this trouble, and he wondered again how he was going to break the news to them that he must leave them so soon. Indeed, at once. Yet that would have to be done that very night, before they all went to bed.
It's delightful, he said with an effort. I hardly feel that I moved at all.
The travellers hung up their cloaks and piled their packs on the floor. Merry led them down the passage and threw open a door at the far end. Firelight came out, and a puff of steam.
A bath!
Cried Pippin.
Oh, blessed Meriadoc! Which order shall we go in?
Said Frodo.
Eldest first or quickest first?
You'll be the last either way, Master Peregrine.
Trust me to arrange things better than that,
said Merry.
We can't begin life at Crickhollow with a quarrel over baths. In that room there are 3 tubs and a copper full of boiling water. There are also towels, mats, and soap. Get inside and be quick.
All right.
Merry and Fatty went into the kitchen on the other side of the passage and busied themselves with the final preparations for late supper. Snatches of competing songs came from the bathroom mixed with the sound of splashing and wallowing. The voice of Pippin was suddenly lifted up above the others in one of Bilbo's favorite bath songs. There was a terrific splash and a shout of Frodo. It appeared that a lot of Pippin's baths had imitated a fountain and leaped on high. Merry went to the door.
What about supper and beer in the throat? He called.
Frodo came out drying his hair.
There's so much water in the air that I'm coming into the kitchen to finish, he said.
Logs, said Merry, looking in. The stone floor was swimming.
You ought to mop all that up before you get anything to eat, Peregrine, he said. Hurry up or we shan't wait for you.
They had supper in the kitchen on the table near the fire. I suppose you 3 don't want mushrooms again, said Fredegar without much hope.
Yes, we shall,
cried Pippin.
They're mine,
said Frodo,
given to me by Mrs. Maggot, a queen among farmers' wives. Take your greedy hands away, and I'll serve them.
Hobbits have a passion for mushrooms, surpassing even the greediest likings of big people, a fact which partly explains young Frodo's long expeditions to the renowned fields of the Marish, and the wrath of the injured maggot. On this occasion there was plenty for all, even according to Hobbit standards. There were also many other things to follow, and when they had finished, even Fatty Bolger heaved a sigh of content. They pushed back the table and drew chairs around the fire.
We'll clear up later,
said Merry.
Now tell me, what about it? I guess that you've been having adventures, which was not quite fair without me. I want a full account. And most of all, I want to know what was the matter with old Maggot, and why he spoke to me like that. He sounded almost as if he was scared, if that was possible.
We have all been scared, said Pippin after a pause, in which Frodo stared at the fire and did not speak. You would have been too, if you had been chased for 2 days by black riders.
And what are they?
Black figures riding on black horses, answered Pippin. If Frodo won't talk, I will tell you the whole tale from the beginning. He then gave a full account of their journey from the time that they left Hobbiton. Sam gave various supporting nods and exclamations. Frodo remained silent.
I should think you were making it all up, said Merry, if I had not seen the black shape on the landing stage, and heard the queer sound in Maggot's voice.
What do you make of it all, Frodo?
Cousin Frodo has been very close, said Pippin, but the time has come for him to open out. So far we have been given nothing more to go on than Farmer Maggot's guess that it has something to do with old Bilbo's treasure. That was only a guess, said Frodo hastily. Maggot does not know anything.
Old Maggot is a shrewd fellow, said Merry. A lot goes on behind his round face that does not come out in his talk. I've heard that he used to go to the old forest at one time, and he has a reputation of knowing a good many strange things. But you can at least tell us, Frodo, whether you think his guess is good or bad.
I think, answered Frodo slowly, that it was a good guess, as far as it goes. There is a connection with Bilbo's old adventures, and the writers are looking, or perhaps one ought to say searching for him. Or for me.
I also fear, if you want to know, that it is no joke at all, and that I am not safe here or anywhere else. He looked around at the windows and walls, as if he was afraid they would suddenly give way. The others looked at him in silence, and exchanged meaning glances amongst themselves.
It's coming out in a minute,
whispered Pippin to Merry. Merry nodded.
Well, said Frodo at last, sitting up and straightening his back, as if he had made a decision, I can't keep it dark any longer. I have got something to tell you all, but I don't know quite how to begin.
I think I could help you, said Merry quietly, by telling you some of it myself.
What do you mean? Said Frodo, looking at him anxiously.
Just this, my dear Frodo. You're miserable because you don't know how to say goodbye. You've meant to leave the Shire, of course, but danger has come on you sooner than you'd expected. And now you're making up your mind to go at once, and you don't want to. We are very sorry for you.
Frodo opened his mouth and shut it again. His look of surprise was so comical that they laughed. Dear old Frodo, said Pippin. Did you really think you had thrown dust in all our eyes? You have not been nearly careful or clever enough for that. You've obviously been planning to go and saying farewell to all your haunts all this year since April. We've constantly heard you muttering, shall I ever go down into that valley again, I wonder, and things like that. And pretending that you had come to the end of your money and basically selling your beloved bag end to those Sackville Bagginses, and all those close talks with Gandalf. Good heavens, said Frodo. I thought I'd been both careful and clever. I don't know what Gandalf would say. Is all the Shire discussing my departure then?
Oh, no, said Merry. Don't worry about that. The secret won't keep for long, of course, but at present it is, I think, only known to us conspirators. After all, you must remember that we know you well, and are often with you. We can usually guess what you're thinking. I knew Bilbo too. To tell you the truth, I'd been watching you rather closely ever since he left. I thought you would go after him sooner or later. Indeed, I expected you to go sooner, and lately we've been very anxious. We've been terrified that you might give us the slip and go off suddenly, all on your own like he did. Ever since this spring, we've kept our eyes open and done a good deal of planning on our own account. You're not going to escape so easily.
But I must go, said Frodo. It cannot be helped, dear friends. It is wretched for us all. But it is no use your trying to keep me. Since you've guessed so much, please help me and do not hinder me. You do not understand, said Pippin. You must go, and therefore we must too. Merry and I are going with you. Sam is an excellent fellow, and would jump down a dragon's throat to save you, if he did not trip over his own feet. But you will need more than one companion on your dangerous adventure. My dear and most beloved hobbits, said Frodo, deeply moved. But I could not allow it. I decided that long ago too. You speak of danger, but you do not understand. This is no treasure hunt, no there and back journey. I'm flying from deadly peril into deadly peril.
Of course we understand, said Merry firmly. That is why we have decided to come. We know the ring is no laughing matter, but we are going to do our best to help you against the enemy.
The ring, said Frodo, now completely amazed.
Yes, the ring. My dear old hobbit, don't you allow for inquisitiveness of friends. I've known about the existence of the ring for years, before Bilbo went away, in fact. But since he obviously regarded it as secret, I kept the knowledge in my head until we formed our conspiracy. I did not know Bilbo, of course, as well as I know you. I was too young. If you want to know how I first found out, I'll tell you.
Go on, said Frodo faintly.
It was the Sackville Bagginses that were his downfall, as you might expect. One day, a year before the party, I happened to be walking along the road when I saw Bilbo ahead. Suddenly, in the distance, the SBs appeared, coming towards us. Bilbo slowed down, and hey, presto, he vanished. I was so startled I hardly had the wits to hide myself in a more ordinary fashion, but I got through the hedge and walked along the field inside. I was peeping through the road after the SBs had passed, and was looking straight at Bilbo when he suddenly reappeared. I caught a glint of gold as he put something back into his trouser pocket. After that, I kept my eyes open. In fact, I confess that I spied. You must admit that it was very intriguing. And I was only my teens. I must be the only one in the Shire besides you, Frodo, that has ever seen the old fellow's secret book.
You've read his book? Cried Frodo. Good heavens above, is nothing safe?
Not too safe, I should say, said Merry. But I have only had one rapid glance, and that was difficult to get. He never left the book about. I wonder what became of it. I should like another look. Have you got it, Frodo?
No, it was not at Bag End. He must have taken it away.
Well, as I was saying, Merry proceeded, I kept my knowledge to myself till this spring when things got serious. Then we formed our conspiracy, and as we were serious too, and meant business, we have not been too scrupulous. You're not a very easy nut to crack, and Gandalf is worse. But if you want to be introduced to our chief investigator, I can introduce him.
Where is he? Said Frodo, looking around as if he expected a masked and sinister figure to come out of a cupboard.
Step forward, Sam,
Said Merry. And Sam stood up with the face scarlet up to the ears.
Here's our collector of information, and he collected a lot, I can tell you, before he was finally caught, after which I may say, he seemed to regard himself as on parole, and dried up.
Sam! Cried Frodo, feeling that amazement could go no further and quite unable to decide whether he felt angry, amused, relieved, or merely foolish.
Yes, sir, said Sam. Begging your pardon, sir, but I meant no wrong to you. Mr. Frodo, nor to Mr. Gandalf, for that matter. He has some sense, mind you, and when you said go alone, he said no, take someone you can trust.
But it does not seem that I can trust anyone, said Frodo. Sam looked at him unhappily.
It all depends on what you want, put in Merry. You can trust us to stick to you through thick and thin, to the bitter end. And you can trust us to keep any secret of yours closer than you keep it yourself. But you cannot trust us to let you face trouble alone and go off without a word. We're your friends, Frodo. Anyway, there it is. We know most of what Gandalf has told you. We know a good deal about the ring. We are horribly afraid, but we are coming with you, or following you like hounds. And after all, sir, added Sam, you did ought to take the elves' advice. Gildor said you should keep them as willing, and you can't deny it.
I don't deny it, said Frodo, looking at Sam, who was now grinning. I don't deny it, but I'll never believe you are sleeping again. Whether you snore or not, I shall kick you hard to make sure.
You are a set of deceitful scoundrels, he said, turning to the others.
But bless you, he laughed, getting up and waving his arms.
I give in. I will take Gildor's advice. If the danger were not so dark, I should dance for joy.
Even so, I cannot help feeling happy, happier than I have felt for a long time. I had dreaded this evening.
Good. That's settled.
3 cheers for Captain Frodo and company!
They shouted, and they danced around him. Merry and Pippin began a song, which they had apparently got ready for the occasion. It was made on the model of the dwarf song that started Bilbo on his adventure long ago, and went to the same tune.
Farewell we call to hearth and hall. The wind may blow and rain may fall. We must away ere break of day, far over wood and mountain tall, to Rivendell where elves yet dwell, in glades beneath the misty fell. Through moor and waste we ride in haste, and whither then we cannot tell.
With foes ahead, behind us tread, beneath the sky shall be our bed, until at last our toil be past, our journey done, our errand sped. We must away, we must away, we ride before the break of day.
Very good, said Frodo. But in that case there are a lot of things to do before we go to bed. Under a roof for tonight, or at any rate.
Oh, that was poetry, said Pippin. Do you really mean to start before the break of day?
I don't know. I fear those Black Riders, and I'm sure it is unsafe to stay in one place long, especially in a place which it is known I was going. Also, Gildor advised me not to wait, but I should very much like to see Gandalf. I could see that even Gildor was disturbed when he heard that Gandalf had never appeared. It really depends on two things. How soon could the riders get to Bucklebury? And how soon should we get off? It will take a good deal of preparation.
The answer to your second question, said Merry, is that we could get off in an hour. I've prepared practically everything. There are 6 ponies in the stable across the fields. Doors and tackle are all packed, except for a few extra clothes and the perishable food.
It seems to have been a very efficient conspiracy, said Frodo. But what about the Black Riders? Would it be safe to wait one day for Gandalf?
That all depends on what you think the riders would do if they found you here, answered Merry. They could have reached here by now, of course, if they were not stopped at the north gate, where the hedge runs out to the river bank, just this side of the bridge. The gate guards would not let them through by night, though they might break through. Even in the daylight, they would try to keep them out, I think. At any rate, until they got the message through to the Master of the Hole, for they would not like the look of the riders, and would certainly be frightened of them. But of course, Buckland cannot resist a determined attack for long, and it is possible that in the morning even a Black Rider that rode up and asked for Mr. Baggins would be let through. It is pretty generally known that you are coming back to live at Crickhollow.
Frodo sat for a while in thought.
I have made up my mind, he said finally. I'm starting tomorrow, as soon as it is light. But I'm not going by road. It would be safer to wait here than that. If I go through the north gate, my departure from Buckland will be known at once, instead of being secret for several days at least, as it might be. And what is more, the bridge and the east road near the borders will certainly be watched, whether any rider gets into Buckland or not. We don't know how many there are, but there are at least 2, and possibly more. The only thing to do is to go off in a quite unexpected direction.
But that can be but that can only mean going into the old forest,
said Fredegar, horrified.
You can't be thinking of doing that.
It is quite as dangerous as Black Riders.
Not quite, said Merry. It sounds very desperate, but I believe Frodo is right. It is the only way of getting off without being allowed at once. With luck, we might get a considerable start.
But you won't have any luck in the old forest, objected Fredegar. No one ever has luck in there. You'll get lost.
People don't go in there.
Oh, yes, they do, said Merry. The Brandybucks go in occasionally when the fit takes them. We have a private entrance. Frodo went in once, long ago. I've been in several times, usually in daylight, of course, when the trees are sleepy and fairly quiet.
Well, do as you think best, said Fredegar. I'm more afraid of the old forest than of anything I know about. The stories about it are a nightmare.
My vote hardly counts, as I'm not going on the journey.
Still, I'm very glad someone is stopping behind to tell Gandalf what you've done when he turns up, as I'm sure he will before long.
Fond as he was of Frodo, Fatty Bolger had no desire of leaving the Shire, nor to see what lay outside it. His family came from East Farthing, from Budgeford and Bridgefields, in fact, but he had never been over the Brandywine Bridge. His task, according to the original plans of the conspirators, was to stay behind and deal with inquisitive folk, and to keep up as long as possible the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still living at Crickhollow. He had even brought along some old clothes of Frodo's to help him in playing the part. They little thought how dangerous that part might prove.
Excellent, said Frodo, when he understood the plan. We could not have left any message behind for Gandalf otherwise.
I don't know whether these riders can read or not, of course, but I should not have dared to risk a written message in case they got in and searched the house.
But if Fatty is willing to hold on the fort, and I can be sure of Gandalf knowing the way we have gone, that decides me. I'm going into the old forest.
first thing tomorrow.
Well, that's that, said Pippin. On the whole, I'd rather have our job than Fatty's, waiting here till Black Riders come.
You wait well till you are well inside the forest, said Fredegar. You'll wish you were back here with me before this time tomorrow.
It's no good arguing about it anymore, said Merry. We have still got to tidy up and put the finishing touches to the packing before we get to bed. I shall call you all before the break of day.
When at last he had got to bed, Frodo could not sleep for some time. His legs ached. He was glad that he was riding in the morning. Eventually, he fell into a vague dream, in which he seemed to be looking out of a high window over a dark sea of tangled trees. Down below, among the roots, there was the sound of creatures crawling and sniffing. He felt sure they would smell him out sooner or later. Then he heard a noise in the distance. At first he thought it was a great wind coming over the leaves of the forest. Then he knew that it was not leaves, but the sound of the sea, far off. A sound he had never heard in waking life, though it had often troubled his dreams. Suddenly he found he was out in the open. There were no trees after all. He was on a dark hearth, and there was a strange salt smell in the air. Looking up, he saw before him a tall white tower, standing alone on a high ridge. A great desire came over him to climb towards the tower, but suddenly a light came in the sky, and there was a noise of thunder. Frodo woke suddenly. It was still dark in the room. Merry was standing there with a candle in one hand and banging on the door with the other.
All right. What is it?
Said Frodo, still shaken and bewildered.
What is it?
Cried Merry.
It's time to get up. It's 4:30 and very foggy. Come on, Sammy's already getting breakfast ready. Even Pippin is up. I'm just going to saddle the ponies and fetch the one that is to be the baggage carrier. Wake that sluggard Fatty, at least he must get up and see us off.
Soon after 6 o'clock, the 5 hobbits were ready to start. Fatty Bolger was still yawning. They stole quietly out of the house. Merry went in front, leading a laden pony, and took his way along a path that went through a spinney behind the house and then cut across several fields. The leaves of trees were glistening, and every twig was dripping. The grass was grey with cold dew. Everything was still, and faraway noises seemed near and clear. Fowls chattering in a yard, someone closing a door of a distant house. In their shed they found the ponies, sturdy little beasts of the kind loved by hobbits, not speedy, but good for a long day's work. They mounted, and soon they were riding off into the mist, which seemed to open reluctantly before them and close forbiddingly behind them. After riding for about an hour, slowly and without talking, they saw the hedge looming suddenly ahead. It was tall and netted over with silver cobwebs.
How are you gonna get through this?
Asked Fredegar.
Follow me,
Said Merry.
and you will see.
He turned to the left along the hedge, and soon they came to a point where it bent inwards, running along the lip of a hollow. A cutting had been made at some distance from the hedge, and went slopingly gently down into the ground. It had walls of bricks at the sides which rose steadily, until suddenly they arced over and formed a tunnel that dived deep under the hedge and came out in the hollow on the other side. Here Fatty Bolger halted.
Goodbye, Frodo,
He said,
I wish you were not going into the forest. I only hope you will not need rescuing before the day is out. But good luck to you, today and every day.
If there are no worse things ahead than the old forest, I shall be lucky, said Frodo. Tell Gandalf to hurry along the east road. We shall soon be back on it and going as fast as we can.
Goodbye.
they cried, and rode down the slope and disappeared from Fredegar's sight into the tunnel. It was dark and damp. At the far end it was closed by a gate of thick set iron bars. Merry got down and unlocked the gate, and when they all had passed through, he pushed it to again. It shut with a clang, and the lock clicked. The sound was ominous.
There, said Merry. You have left the Shire, and are now outside, and on the edge
of the old forest.
Are the stories about it true? Asked Pippin.
I don't know what stories you mean, Merry answered. If you mean the old bogey stories Fatty's nurses used to tell him, about goblins and wolves and things of that sort, I should say no. At any rate, I don't believe them. But the forest is queer. Everything in it is very much more alive and more aware of what's going on, so to speak, than things that are in the Shire. And the trees do not like strangers. They watch you. They are usually content merely to watch you as long as daylight lasts, and don't do much. Occasionally the most unfriendly ones may drop a branch, or stick a root out, or grasp you with a long trailer. But at night things can be most alarming, or so I'm told. I've only once or twice been here after dark, and then only near the hedge. I thought all the trees were whispering to each other, passing news and plots along the unintelligible language, and the branches swayed and groped without any wind. They do say the trees do actually move, and can surround strangers and hem them in. In fact, not long ago they attacked the hedge. They came and planted themselves right by it and leaned over it. But the hobbits came and cut down hundreds of trees and made a great bonfire in the forest and burned all the ground in a long strip east of the hedge. After that, the trees gave up the attack, but they became very unfriendly. There is still a wide bare space not far inside where a bonfire was made.
Is it only the trees that are dangerous? Asked Pippin.
There are various queer things living deep in the forest, and on the far side, said Merry. Or at least I've heard so, but I've never seen any of them. But something makes paths. Whenever one comes inside, one finds open tracks, but they seem to shift and change from time to time in a queer fashion. Not far from this tunnel there is, or was for a long time, the beginnings of a quite broad path leading to the bonfire glade, and then on more or less in our direction, east and a little north. That is the path I'm trying to find.
The hobbits now left the tunnel gates and rode across the wide hollow. On the far side there was a faint path leading up to the floor of the forest, 100 yards and more beyond the hedge, but it vanished as soon as it brought them under the trees. Looking back, they could see the dark line of hedge through the stems of trees that were already thick about them. Looking ahead, they could see only tree trunks of innumerable sizes and shapes, straight or bent, twisted, leaning squat or slender, smooth or gnarled and branched. And all the stems were green or grey with moss and slimy, shaggy growths. Merry alone seemed fairly cheerful.
You had better lead on and find that path, Frodo said to him. Don't let us lose one another, or forget which way the hedge lies.
They picked away among the trees, and their ponies plodded along, carefully avoiding the many writhing and interlacing roots. There was no undergrowth. The ground was rising steadily, and as they went forward it seemed that the trees became taller, darker, and thicker. There was no sound, except an occasional drip of moisture falling through the still leaves. For the moment there was no whispering or movement among the branches, but they all got an uncomfortable feeling that they were being watched, with disapproval, deepening to dislike and even enmity. The feeling steadily grew, until they found themselves looking up quickly or glancing back over their shoulders as if they expected a sudden blow. There was not as yet any sign of a path, and the trees seemed constantly to bar their way. Pippin suddenly felt that he could not bear it any longer, and without warning let out a shout.
Oi! Oi! I'm not going to do anything! Just let me pass through, will you?
The others halted, startled, but the cry fell as if muffled by a heavy curtain. There was no echo or answer, though the woods seemed to become more crowded and more watchful than before.
I should not shout if I were you, said Merry. It does more harm than good.
Frodo began to wonder if it were possible to find a way through, and if he had been right to make the others come into this abominable wood. Merry was looking from side to side, and seemed already uncertain which way to go. Pippin noticed it.
It has not taken you long to lose us,
he said, but at that moment Merry gave a whistle of relief and pointed ahead.
Well, well, he said, these trees do shift. There is a bonfire glade in front of us, or I hope so, but the path to it seems to have moved away.
The light grew clearer as they went forward. Suddenly they came out of the trees and found themselves in a wide, circular space. There was sky above them,
Blue and clear to their surprise, for down under the forest roof they had not been able to see the rising morning and the lifting of the mist. The sun was not, however, high enough yet to shine down into the clearing, though its light was on tree-tops. The leaves were all thicker and greener about the edges of the glade, enclosing it with an almost solid wall. No tree grew there, only rough grass and many tall plants. Stalky and faded hemlocks, wood parsley, fireweed sending into fluffy ashes, and rampant nettles and thistles. A dreary place, but it seemed a charming and cheerful garden after the close forest. The hobbits felt encouraged, and looked up hopefully at the broadening daylight in the sky. At the far side of the glade there was a break in the wall of trees, and a clear path beyond it. They could see it running on into the wood, wide in places and open above, though every now and again the trees drew in and overshadowed it with their dark boughs. Up this path they rode. They were still climbing gently, but they now went much quicker and with better heart, for it seemed to them that the forest had relented and was going to let them pass unhindered after all. But after a while the air began to get hot and stuffy. The trees drew close again on either side, and they could no longer see far ahead. Now, stronger than ever, they felt again the ill will of the wood pressing on them. So silent was it that the fall of their ponies' hoofs, rustling on dead leaves, and occasionally stumbling on hidden roots, seemed to thud in their ears. Frodo tried to sing a song to encourage them, but his voice sank to a murmur. O wanderers in the shadowed land, despair not, for though dark they stand, all woods there be must end at last, and see the open sun go past. The setting sun, the rising sun, the day's end or the day begun. For east or west all woods must fail. Fail. Even as he said the word, his voice faded into silence. The air seemed heavy, and the making of wood wearisome. Just behind them, a large branch fell from an old overhanging tree with a crash into the path. The tree seemed to close in before them. "They do not like all that about yending and failing," said Mary.
I should not sing any more at present. Wait till we get to the edge, and then we'll turn and give them a rousing chorus.
He spoke cheerfully, and if he felt any great anxiety, he did not show it. The others did not answer. They were depressed. A heavy weight was settling steadily on Frodo's heart, and he regretted now with every step forward that he had ever thought of challenging the menace of the trees. He was, indeed, just about to stop and propose going back, if that was still possible, when things took a new turn. The path stopped climbing, and became for a while nearly level. The dark trees drew aside, and ahead they could see the path going almost straight forward. Before them, but some distance off, there stood a green hilltop, treeless, rising like a bald head out of the encircling wood. The path seemed to be making directly for it. They now hurried forward again, delighted, with the thought of climbing out for a while above the roof of the forest. The path dipped, and then again began to climb upwards, leading them at last to the foot of the steep hillside. There it left the trees and faded into the turf. The wood stood all around the hill like thick hair that ended sharply in a circle around a shaven crown. The hobbits led their ponies up, winding round and round until they reached the top. There they stood and gazed about them. The air was gleaming and sunlit, but hazy, and they could not see to any great distance. Near at hand the mist was now almost gone, though here and there it lay in hollows of the wood, and to the south of them, out of a deep fold cutting right across the forest, the fog still rose like steam or wisps of white smoke.
"That," said Merry, pointing with his hand, "that is the line of the Withywindle. It comes down out of the downs and flows southwest through the midst of the forest to join the Brandywine below Haysund. We don't want to go that way. With the Withywindle Valley, it is said to be the queerest part of the whole wood, the center of which all the queerness comes, as it were."
The others looked in the direction that Mary pointed out, but they could see little but mists over the damp and deep-cut valley, and beyond the southern half of the forest faded from view. The sun on the hilltop was now getting hot. It must have been about 11 o'clock, but the autumn haze still prevented them from seeing much in other directions. In the west they could not make out either the line of the hedge or the valley of the Brandywine beyond it. Northward, where they looked most hopefully, they could see nothing that might be the line of the great east road of which they were making. They were on an island in a sea of trees, and the horizon was veiled. On the southeastern side the ground fell very steeply, as if the slopes of the hill were continued far down under the trees, like island shores that really are the sides of a mountain rising out of deep waters. They sat on the green edge and looked out over the woods below them while they ate their midday meal. As the sun rose and passed noon, they glimpsed far off, in the eastern, the grey-green lines of the downs that lay beyond the old forest on that side. That cheered them greatly, for it was good to see a sight of anything beyond the wood's borders, though they did not mean to go that way, if they could help it. The Barrow Downs had a sinister reputation in Hobbit legend, as the forest itself. At length they made up their minds to go on again. The path that had brought them to the hill reappeared on the northward side, but they had not followed it far before they became aware that it was bending steadily to the right. Soon it began to descend rapidly, and they guessed that it must actually be heading towards the Withywindle Valley, not at all the direction they wished to take. After some discussion, they decided to leave this misleading path and strike northward. For although they had not been able to see it in front of the hilltop, the road must lie that way, and it could not be many miles off. Also northward, and to the left of the path, the land seemed to be drier and more open, climbing up to slopes where the trees were thinner, and pines and firs replaced the oaks, and ashes and other strange and nameless trees of denser wood. At first their choice seemed to be good. They got along at a fair speed, though whenever they got a glimpse of the sun in an open glade, they seemed unaccountably to have veered eastwards. But after a time the trees began to close in again, just where they had appeared from distance to be thinner and less tangled. The deep folds in the ground were discovered unexpectedly, like the ruts of great giant wheels or wide moats in sunken roads, long disused and choked with brambles. These lay unusually right across their line of march, and could not be crossed by scrambling down and out again, which was troublesome and difficult with their ponies. Each time they climbed down, they found the hollow filled with thick brushes and matted undergrowth, which somehow would not yield to the left, but only gave way when they turned to the right. And they had to go some distance along the bottom before they could find a way up the further bank. Each time they clambered out, the trees seemed deeper and darker, and always to the left and upwards it was most difficult to find a way, and they were forced to the right and downwards. After an hour or two they had lost all clear sense of direction, though they knew well enough that they had long ceased to go northward at all. They were being headed off, and were simply following a course chosen for them, eastwards and southwards, into the heart of the forest and not out of it. The afternoon was wearing away when they scrambled and stumbled into a fold that was wider and deeper than any they had yet met. It was so steep and overhung that it proved impossible to climb out of it again, either forwards or backwards, without leaving their ponies and their baggage behind. All they could do was to follow the fold, downwards. The ground grew soft, and in places boggy. Springs appeared in the banks, and soon they found themselves following a brook that trickled and babbled through a weedy bed. Then the ground began to fall rapidly, and the brook, growing strong and noisy, flowed and leaped swiftly downhill. They were in a deep, dim-lit gully overarched with trees high above them. After stumbling along for some way along the stream, they came quite suddenly out of the gloom. As if through a gate they saw the sunlight before them. Coming to the opening, they found that they had made their way down through a cleft in a high-speed bank, across a cliff. At its feet was a wide space of grass and reeds, and in the distance could be glimpsed another bank, almost as steep. A golden afternoon of late sunshine lay warm and drowsy upon the hidden land between. In the midst of it there wound lazily a dark river of brown water, bordered with ancient willows, arched over with willows, blocked with fallen willows, and flecked with thousands of faded willow leaves. The air was thick with them, fluttering yellow from the branches, for there was a warm and gentle breeze blowing softly in the valley, and the reeds were rustling, and the willow boughs were creaking.
Well, now I have at least some notion of where we are, said Mary. We've come almost in the opposite direction in which we intended. This is the River Withywindle. I will go on and explore.
He passed out into the sunshine and disappeared into the long grasses. After a while he reappeared, and reported that there was fairly solid ground between the cliff foot and the river. In some places firm turf went down to the water's edge.
What's more, he said, there seems to be something like a footpath winding along this side of the river. If we turn left and follow it, we shall be bound to come out on the east side of the forest eventually.
I dare say, said Pippin, that the track goes so far, and does not simply lead us into a bog and leave us there. Who made the track, do you suppose, and why? I'm sure it was not for our benefit. I'm getting very suspicious of this forest and everything in it. And I begin to believe all the stories about it. And have you any idea how far eastward we should have to go?
No, said Mary. I haven't. I don't know in the least how far down the Withywindle we are, or who could possibly come here often enough to make a path along it. But there is no other way out that I can see or think of.
There being nothing else for it, they filed out, and Mary led them to the path that he had discovered. Everywhere the reeds and grasses were lush and tall, in places far above their heads. But once found, the path was easy to follow, as it turned and twisted, picking out the sounder ground among the bogs and pools. Here and there it passed over other rills, running down gullies into the Withywindle out of the higher forest lands. And at these points there were tree trunks or bundles of brushwood laid carefully across. The hobbits began to feel very hot. There were armies of flies of all kinds buzzing around their ears, and the afternoon sun was burning on their backs. At last they came suddenly into a thin shade. Great grey branches reached across the path. Each step forward became more reluctant than the last. Sleepiness seemed to be creeping out of the ground and up their legs, and falling softly out of the air upon their heads and eyes. Frodo felt his chin go down and his head nod. Just in front of him, Pippin fell forward onto his knees. Frodo halted.
He's no good,
he heard Mary saying.
Can't go another step without rest. Must have nap. It's cool under the willows. There's flies.
Frodo did not like the sound of this.
Come on, he cried. We can't have a nap yet. We must get clear of the forest first.
But the others were too far gone to care. Beside them, Sam stood yawning and blinking stupidly. Suddenly Frodo himself felt sleep overwhelm him. His head swam. There now seemed hardly a sound in the air. The flies had stopped buzzing. Only a gentle noise on the edge of hearing, a soft fluttering as of a song half whispered, seemed to stir in the boughs above. He lifted his heavy eyes and saw leaning over him a huge willow tree, old and hoary. Enormous it looked, its sprawling branches going up like reaching arms with many long-fingered hands. Its knotted and twisted trunk gaping in wide fissures that leaked faintly as the boughs moved. The leaves fluttering against the bright sky dazzled him, and he toppled over, lying where he fell upon the grass. Merry and Pippin dragged themselves forward and lay down with their backs to the willow trunk. Behind them the great cracks gaped wide to receive them as the tree swayed and creaked. They looked up at the grey and yellow leaves, moving softly against the light and singing. They shut their eyes, and then it seemed that they could almost hear words, cool words, saying something about water and sleep. They gave themselves up to the spell and fell fast asleep at the foot of the great grey willow. Frodo lay for a while, fighting with the sleep that was overpowering him. Then, with an effort, he struggled to his feet again. He felt a compelling desire for cool water.
"Oh, wait for me, Sam," he stammered. "Must bathe feet a minute." Half in a dream, he wandered forward to the riverward side of the tree, where the great winding roots grew into the stream, like gnarled dragonets straining down to drink. He straddled one of these and paddled his hot feet into the cool brown water. And there he too suddenly fell asleep with his back against the tree. Sam sat down and scratched his head, and yawned like a cavern. He was worried. The afternoon was getting late, and he thought this sudden sleepiness uncanny.
There's more behind this than sun and warm air,
He muttered to himself.
I don't like this great big tree. I don't trust it. Hark at it singing about sleep now. This won't do at all.
He pulled himself to his feet and staggered off to see what had become of the ponies. He found that two had wandered on a good way along the path, and he had just caught them and brought them back towards the others, when he heard two noises, one loud and the other soft but very clear. One was the splash of something heavy falling into the water. The other was a noise like the snick of a lock when a door quietly closes fast. He rushed back to the bank. Frodo was in the water close to the hedge, and a great tree root seemed to be over him and holding him down, but he was not struggling. Sam gripped him by the jacket and dragged him from under the root, and then with difficulty hauled him onto the bank. Almost at once he woke and coughed and spluttered.
Do you know, Sam, he said at length, the beastly tree threw me in. I felt it. The big root just twisted around and tipped me in. You were dreaming, I expect, Mr. Frodo, said Sam. You shouldn't sit in such a place if you feel sleepy. But what about the others? Frodo asked. I wonder what sort of dreams they were having.
Where they ran round to the other side of the tree, and then Sam undertook the click he had heard. Pippin had vanished. The crack by which he had laid himself had closed together, so that not a chink could be seen. Merry was trapped. Another crack had closed about his waist. His legs lay outside, but the rest of him was inside a dark opening, the edges of which gripped like a pair of pincers. Frodo and Sam beat first upon the tree trunk where Pippin had lain. They then struggled frantically to pull open the jaws of the crack that held poor Merry. It was quite useless.
What a foul thing to happen! Cried Frodo wildly. Why did we ever come to this dreadful forest? I wish we were all back in Crick Hollow.
He kicked the tree with all his strength, heedless of his own feet. A hardly perceptible shiver ran through the stream and up to the branches. The leaves rustled and whispered, with a sound of now faint and far-off laughter.
I suppose we haven't got an axe among our luggage, Mr. Frodo?
Asked Sam.
I brought a little hatchet for chopping firewood, said Frodo. That wouldn't be much use. Wait a minute, cried Sam, struck by an idea suggested by firewood. We might do something with fire. We might, said Frodo doubtfully. We might succeed in roasting Pippin alive inside. We might try to hurt or frighten this tree to begin with, said Sam fiercely. If it don't let them go, I'll have it down, if I have to gnaw it.
He ran to the ponies and before long came back with 2 tinder boxes and a hatchet. Quickly they gathered dry grass and leaves and bits of bark and made a pile of broken twigs and chopped sticks. These they had heaped against the trunk on the far side of the tree for the prisoners. As soon as Sam had struck a spark into the tinder, it kindled the dry grass, and a flurry of flame and smoke went up. The twigs cackled. Little fingers of fire licked against the dry, scored rind of the ancient tree and scorched it. A tremor ran through the whole willow. The leaves seemed to hiss above their heads with a sound of pain and anger. A loud scream came from Merry, and from far inside the tree they heard Pippin give a muffled yell.
Put it out! Put it out!
Cried Merry.
He'll squeeze me through if you don't! He says no!
Who? What?
Shouted Frodo, rushing round to the corner of the side of the tree.
Put it out! Put it out!
Begged Merry. The branches of the willow began to sway violently. There was a sound as of a wind rising and spreading outwards to the branches of all the other trees round about. as though they had dropped a stone into a quiet slumber of the river valley and set up ripples of anger that ran out over the whole forest. Sam kicked at the little fire and stamped out the sparks, but Frodo, without any clear idea why he did so or what he hoped for, ran along the path crying, "Help! Help! Help!" It seemed to him that he could hardly hear the sound of his own shrill voice. It was blown away from him by the willow wind and drowned in the clamor of leaves as soon as the words left his mouth. He felt desperate, lost, and witless. Suddenly he stopped. There was an answer, or so he thought, but it seemed to come from behind him, away down the path further back into the forest. He turned round and listened, and soon there could be no doubt. Someone was singing a song. A deep, glad voice was singing carelessly and happily, but it was singing nonsense. Half hopeful and half afraid of some new danger, Frodo and Sam now both stood still. Suddenly, out of a long string of nonsense words, or so they seemed, the voice rose up loud and clear and burst into the song.
Hey, come, merry doll, my darling, life goes the weather wind and the feathers starling, down along the hill, shining in the sunlight, waiting on the horse above the cold starlight. There my pretty lady is, river woman's daughter, slender as the willow one, clearer as the water. Oh, Tom Bombadil, water lily springing, come along, hopping home again. Can you hear him ringing? Hey, come, dairy doll, a merry-o. Goldberry, Goldberry, manly yellow berry-o. Poor old willow man, you tuck your roots away. Tom's in a hurry now, evening will follow day. Tom's going home again, water lilies bringing. Hey, come, dairy doll, can't you hear me singing?
Frodo and Sam stood as if enchanted. The wind puffed out, the leaves hung silently again on stiff branches. There was another burst of song, and then suddenly, hopping and dancing along the path, there appeared above the reeds an old battered hat, with a tall crown, and a long blue feather stuck into the band. With another hop and a bound there came into view a man, or so it seemed. At any rate, he was too large and heavy for a hobbit, if not quite tall enough for one of the big people, though he made noise enough for one, stumping along with great yellow boots on his thick legs, and charging through grass and rushes like a cow going down to drink. He had a blue coat, and a long brown beard. His eyes were blue and bright, his face was red as a ripe apple, but creased into 100 wrinkles of laughter. In his hands he carried a large leaf as on a stray small pile of white water lilies. "Help!" cried Frodo and Sam, running towards him with their hands stretched out.
Whoa, whoa, steady there,
cried the old man, holding up one hand, and they stopped short, as if they had been struck stiff.
Now, my little fellows, where be you a-going to, puffin' like the bellows? What's the matter here, then? Do you know who I am? I'm Tom Bombadil. Tell me what's your trouble. Tom's in a hurry now. Don't you crush my lilies.
My friends are caught in the willow tree, cried Frodo breathlessly. Master Merry's been squeezed in a crack.
What?
Shouted Tom Bombadil, leaping up in the air.
Old Val Willow? Not worse than that, eh? Oh, that can soon be mended. I know the tune for him, old grey willow man. How freezes marrow cold if he don't behave himself. I'll sing his roots off. I'll sing a wind up and blow leaf and branch away, old Van Willow.
Setting down his lilies carefully on the grass, he ran to the tree. There he saw Merry's feet still sticking out. The rest had already been drawn further inside. Tom put his mouth to the crack and began singing into it in a low voice. They could not catch the words, but evidently Merry was aroused. His legs began to kick. Tom sprang away, and breaking off a hanging branch, he smote the side of the willow with it.
You let them out again, old man Willow, he said. And what were you a-thinking of? You should not be waking. Eat earth, dig deep, drink water. Go to sleep. Bombadil is talking.
He then seized Merry's feet and drew him out of the suddenly widening crack. There was a tearing creak, and the other crack split open, and out of it Pippin sprang as if he had been kicked. Then with a loud snap, both cracks closed fast again. A shudder ran through the tree, from root to tip, and complete silence fell.
Thank you,
Said the hobbits, one after another. Tom Bombadil burst out laughing.
Well, my little fellows,
Said he, stooping so that he peered into their faces.
you shall come home with me. The table is all laden with yellow cream, honeycomb, and white bread and butter. Goldberries awaiting. Time enough for questions around the supper table. You follow after me as quick as you are able.
With that he picked up his lilies, and then with a beckoning wave of his hand, went hopping and dancing along the path eastward, still singing loudly and nonsensically. Too surprised and too relieved to talk, the hobbits followed after him as fast as they could. But that was not fast enough. Tom soon disappeared in front of them, and the noise of his singing got fainter and further away. Suddenly his voice came floating back to them with a loud halloo.
Up along, my yellow friends, up the withy window. Tom's going on ahead with candles for to kindle. Down west sinks the sun, but soon you'll be groping when the night shadows fall. Then the door will open. Out from the window panes, light will twinkle yellow. Fear no alder black, heed no hoary willow. Fear neither root nor bough. Tom goes on before you. Hey now, merry Dole, we'll be waiting for you.
After that the hobbits heard no more. Almost at once the sun seemed to sink into the trees behind them. They thought of the slanting light of evening glittering into the Brandywine River, and the windows of Bucklebury beginning to gleam with hundreds of lights. Great shadows fell across them. Trunks and branches of trees hung dark and threatening all over the path. White mists began to rise and curl on the surface of the river, and stray about the roots of the trees upon its borders. Out of the very ground at their feet a shadowy steam arose and mingled with the swiftly falling dusk. It became difficult to follow the path, and they were very tired. Their legs seemed leaden. Strange furtive noises ran among the bushes and reeds on either side of them, and if they looked up to the pale sky they caught sight of queer, gnarled and knobby faces that loomed dark against the twilight, and leered down at them from the high bank at the edges of the wood. They began to feel that all this country was unreal, and that they were stumbling through an ominous dream that led to no awakening. Just as they felt their feet slowing down to a standstill, they noticed the ground was gently rising. The water began to murmur. In the darkness they caught the white glimmer of foam, where the river flowed over a short fall. Then suddenly the trees came to an end, and the mists were left behind. They stepped out from the forest and found a wide sweep of grass welling up before them. The river, now small and swift, was leaping merrily down to meet them, glinting here and there in the light of the stars, which were already shining in the sky. The grass under their feet was smooth and short, as if it had been mown or shaven. The eaves of the forest behind were clipped, and thin as a hedge. The path was now plain before them, well tended and bordered with stone. It wound up to the top of a grassy knoll, now grey under the pale starry night, and there, still high above them on a further slope, they saw the twinkling lights of a house. Down again the path went, and then up again, up a long smooth hillside of turf, towards the light. Suddenly a wide yellow beam flowed out brightly from a door that was opened. There was Tom Bombadil's house before them, up, down, under hill. Behind it, a steep shoulder of the land lay grey and bare, and beyond that, the dark shapes of the Barrow Downs stalked away to the eastern night. They all hurried forward, hobbits and ponies. Already half their weariness and all their fears had fallen from them.
Hey, come, merry Dole!
Rolled out the song to greet them.
Hey, come, merry Dole, hope along my hearties! Hobbits, ponies all, we're all fond of parties. Now let the fun begin, let us sing together.
Then another clear voice, as young and ancient as spring,
like the song of a glad water flowing down into the night from a bright morning in the hills, came falling like silver to meet them.
Now let the song begin, let us sing together. Sun, stars, moon and mist, rain and cloudy weather. Light on the budding leaf, dew on the feather. Wind on the open hill, bells on the heather. Reeds by the shady pool, lilies by the water. Oh, Tom Bombadil and the river daughter.
With that song, the hobbits stood upon the threshold, and a golden light was all about them. The four hobbits stepped over the wide stone threshold and stood still, blinking. They were in a long, low room filled with the light of lamps swinging from beams onto the roof, and on the table of dark polished wood stood many candles, tall and yellow, burning brightly. In a chair, at the far side of the room facing the outer door, sat a woman. Her long yellow hair rippled down her shoulders. Her gown was green, green as young reeds, shot with silver like beads of dew, and her belt was of gold, shaped like a chain of flag lilies set in the pale blue eyes of forget-me-nots. About her feet, in wide vessels of green and brown earthenware, white water lilies were floating, so that she seemed to be enthroned in the midst of a pool. "Enter, good guests," she said, and as she spoke, they knew it was her clear voice they were heard singing. They came a few timid steps further into the room and began to bow low, feeling strangely surprised and awkward, like folk that, knocking at a cottage door to beg for a drink of water, have been answered by a fair young elf queen clad in living flowers. But before they could say anything, she sprang lightly up and over the lily bowls and ran laughing towards them, and as she ran, her gown rustled softly like the wind in the flowering borders of a river. "Come, dear folk," she said, taking Frodo by the hand, "laugh and be merry. I am Goldberry, daughter of the river." Then lightly she passed them, and closing the door, she turned her back to it, with her white arms spread out across it. "Let us shut out the night," she said, "for you are still afraid, perhaps, of mist and tree shadows and deep water and untamed things. Fear nothing, for tonight you are under the roof of Tom Bombadil." The hobbits looked at her in wonder, and she looked at each of them and smiled. "Fair Lady Goldberry," said Frodo at last, feeling his heart moved with a joy that he did not understand. He stood as he had at times stood enchanted by fair elven voices, but the spell that was now laid upon him was different. Less keen and lofty was the delight, but deeper and nearer to the mortal heart. Marvelous, and yet not strange. "Fair Lady Goldberry," he said again, "now the joy that was hidden in the songs we heard is made plain to me. Oh, slender as the willow wand, oh, clearer than clear water, oh, reed by the living pool, fair river daughter, oh, springtime and summertime and spring again after, oh, wind on the waterfall and leaves laughter." Suddenly he stopped and stammered, overcome with his surprise to hear himself saying such things, but Goldberry laughed. "Welcome," she said. "I've not heard that folk of the Shire were so sweet-tongued, but I see you are an elf friend. The light in your eyes and the ring in your voice tells it. It is a merry meeting. Sit now, sit and wait for the master in the house. He will not be long. He has tended your tired beasts." The hobbits sat down gladly in low rush-seated chairs, while Goldberry busied herself around the table, and their eyes followed her, for the slender grace of her movement filled them with quiet delight. From somewhere behind the house came a sound of singing. Every now and again they caught, among many a derry-dole and merry-dole and ring-a-ding-a-dillo, the repeated words,
"Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow."
"Fair lady," said Frodo again after a while, "tell me if my asking does not seem foolish. Who is Tom Bombadil?" "He is," said Goldberry, staying her swift movements and smiling. Frodo looked at her questioningly. "He is as you have seen him," she said in answer to his look. "He is the master of the wood, water, and hill. Then all this strange land belongs to him?"
No, indeed, she answered, and her smile faded. That would indeed be a burden, she added in a low voice, as if to herself. The trees and the grasses and all things growing or living in the land belong to each of themselves. Tom Bombadil is the master. No one has ever caught old Tom walking in the forest, wading in the water, leaping on the hilltops under the light and shadow. He has no fear. Tom Bombadil is master.
A door opened and in came Tom Bombadil. He had now no hat, and his thick brown hair was covered with autumn leaves. He laughed, and going to Goldberry, took her hand. "Here's my pretty lady," he said, bowing to the hobbits. "Here's my Goldberry, clothed all in silver green, with flowers in her griddle. He's the table laden. I see yellow cream and honeycomb, and white bread and butter, milk, cheese, and green herbs, and ripe berries gathered. Is that enough for us? Is the supper ready?"
It is, said Goldberry, but the guests perhaps are not.
Tom clapped his hands and cried, "Tom, Tom! Your guests are tired and all, and you had near forgotten. Come now, merry friends, and Tom will refresh you. You shall clean grimy hands, and wash your weary faces, cast off your muddy cloaks, and comb out your tangles." He opened the door, and they followed him down the short passage and round a sharp turn. They came to a low room with a sloping roof. A penthouse, it seemed, built on the north end of the house. Its walls were of clean stone, but they were mostly covered with green hanging mats with yellow curtains. The floor was flagged and strewn with fresh green rushes. There were 4 deep mattresses, each piled with white blankets laid on the floor along one side. Against the opposite wall was a long bench laden with wide earthenware basins, and beside it stood brown ewers filled with water, some cold, some steaming hot. There were soft green slippers set ready beside each bed. Before long, washed and refreshed, the hobbits were seated at the table, 2 on each side, while at either end sat Goldberry and the master. It was a long and merry meal. Though the hobbits ate as only famished hobbits can eat, there was no lack. The drink in their drinking bowls seemed to be clear, cold water, yet it went to their hearts like wine and set free their voices. The guests became suddenly aware that they were singing merrily, as if it was easier and more natural than talking. At last Tom and Goldberry rose and cleared the table swiftly. The guests were commanded to sit quiet, and were set with chairs, each with a footstool to his tired feet. There was a fire in the wide hearth before them, and it was burning with a sweet smell, as if it were built of apple wood. When everything was set in order, all the lights in the room were put out, except one lamp and a pair of candles at each end of the chimney shelf. Then Goldberry came and stood before them, holding a candle, and she wished them each a good night and deep sleep. "Have peace now," she said, "until the morning. Heed no nightly noises, for nothing passes door and window here save moonlight and starlight, and the wind off the hilltop. Good night." She passed out of the room with a glimmer and a rustle. The sound of her footsteps was like a stream falling gently away downhill over cool stones with the quiet of night. Tom sat on a while beside them in silence, while each of them tried to muster the courage to ask one of the many questions they had meant to ask at supper. Sleep gathered on their eyelids. At last Frodo spoke. Did you hear me calling, Master? Or was it just chance that brought you at that moment?" Tom stirred like a man shaken out of an unpleasant dream.
"Eh? What?"
said he.
"Did I hear you calling? Nay, I did not hear. I was busy singing. Just chance brought me here then, if chance you call it. Hi, it was no plan of mine, though I was waiting for you. We heard news of you, and learned that you were wandering. We guessed you'd come here along down the water. All paths lead that way, down to the Withywindle. Old Grey Willow Man, he's a mighty singer, and it's hard for little folk to escape his cunning mazes. But Tom had an errand there that he dared not hinder." Tom nodded, as if sleep was taking him again,
But he went on in a soft singing voice.
I had an errand there, gathering water lilies, green leaves and lilies white, to please my pretty lady. The last year, the year's end, to keep them from the winter, to flower by their pretty feet till the sound snows are melted. Each year at summer's end I go to find them for her, in a wide pool deep and clear, far down the withy windle. There they open first in spring, and there they linger latest. By that pool long ago I found the river daughter, fair young Goldberry, sitting in the rushes. Sweet was her singing then, and her heart was beating.
He opened his eyes and looked at them with sudden glint of blue.
And that proved well for you, for now I shall no longer go down deep again along the forest water, not while the year is old, nor shall I be passing Old Man Willow's house's side is of springtime, not till the merry spring, when the river daughter dances down the withy path to bathe in the water.
He fell silent again, but Frodo could not help asking one more question, the one that most desired to have answered.
Tell us, master, he said, about the Willow Man. What is he? I've never heard of him before.
No! Don't!
Said Merry and Pippin together, sitting suddenly upright.
Not now. Not until the morning.
Oh, that is right, said the old man. Now is the time for resting. Some things are ill to hear when the world's in shadow. Sleep till the morning light, lest on the pillow heed no nightly noise, fear no grey willow.
And with that he took down the lamp and blew it out, and grasping a candle in either hand, he led them out of the room. Their mattresses and pillows were soft as down, and the blankets were of white wool. They had hardly laid themselves on the deep beds and drawn the light covers over them before they were asleep. In the dead night, Frodo lay in a dream without light. Then he saw the young moon rising. Under its thin light there loomed before him a black wall of rock, pierced by a dark arch like a great gate. It seemed to Frodo that he was lifted up, and passing over he saw that the rock wall was a circle of hills, and that within it was a plain, and in the midst of the plain stood a pinnacle of stone, like a vast tower, but not made by hands. On its top stood the figure of a man. The moon as it rose seemed to hang for a moment above his head and glistened in his white hair as the wind stirred it. Up from the dark plain below came the crying of fell voices and the howling of many wolves. Suddenly a shadow like the shape of great wings passed across the moon. The figure lifted his arms and a light flashed from the staff that he wielded. A mighty eagle swept down and bore him away. The voices wailed and the wolves yammered. There was a noise like a strong wind blowing, and on it was borne the sound of hoofs, galloping from the east.
Black Riders,
thought Frodo, as he wakened, with the sound of the hoofs still echoing in his mind. He wondered if he would ever again have the courage to leave the safety of these stone walls. He lay motionless, still listening, but all was now silent. And at last he turned and fell asleep again, and wandered into some other unremembered dream. At his side Pippin lay dreaming pleasantly, but a change came over his dreams, and he turned and groaned. Suddenly he woke, or thought he had waked, and yet still heard in the darkness the sound that had disturbed his dream. The noise was like branches fretting in the wind, twig fingers scraping wall and window. He wondered if there were willow trees close to the house, and then suddenly he had a dreadful feeling that he was not in an ordinary house at all, but inside the willow, and listening to that horrible dry, creaking voice laughing at him again. He sat up and felt the soft pillows yield to his hands, and he lay down again relieved. He seemed to hear the echo of words in his ears.
Fear nothing. Have peace until the morning. Heed no nightly noise.
Then he went to sleep again. It was the sound of water that Merry heard falling into his quiet sleep, water streaming down gently, and then spreading and spreading irresistibly all around the house into a dark, shoreless pool. It gurgled under the walls and was rising slowly but surely.
I shall be drowned,
he thought.
It will find its way in, and then I shall drown.
He felt that he was lying in a soft, slimy bog, and springing up he set his foot on the corner of a cold, hard flagstone. Then he remembered where he was and lay down again. He seemed to hear or remember hearing,
Nothing passes doors or windows save the moonlight and starlight, and the wind off the hilltop.
A little breath of sweet air moved the curtain. He breathed deep and fell asleep again. As far as he could remember, Sam slept through the night in a deep content, if logs are contented. They woke up, all four at once, in the morning light. Tom was moving about the room, whistling like a starling. When he heard them stir, he clapped his hands and cried,
Hey, come, merry dole, derry dole, my hearties!
He drew back the yellow curtains, and the hobbit saw that these had covered the windows at either end of the room, one looking east and the other looking west. They leapt up refreshed. Frodo ran to the eastern window and found himself looking into a kitchen garden, grey with dew. He had half expected to see turf right up to the walls, turf all pocked with hoof prints. Actually, his view was screened by a tall line of beams on poles, but above and far beyond them the grey top of the hill loomed up against the sunrise. It was a pale morning. In the east, behind the long clouds like lines of soiled wool, stained red at the edges, lay glimmering deeps of yellow. The sky spoke of rain to come, but the light was broadening quickly, and the red flowers of the beans began to glow against the wet green leaves. Pippin looked out of the western window, down into a pool of mist. The forest was hidden under a fog. It was like looking down onto a sloping cloud roof from above. There was a fold or channel where the mist was broken into many plumes and billows, the valley of the Withywindle. The stream ran down the hill of the left and vanished into the white shadows. Near at hand was a flower garden, and a clipped hedge silver-netted, and beyond that grey shaven grass pale with dewdrops. There was no willow tree to be seen.
Good morning, merry friends, cried Tom, opening the eastern window wide.
A cool air flowed in. It had a rainy smell.
Sun won't show her face much today, I'm thinking. I have been walking wide, leaping on the hilltops since the grey dawn began, nosing wind and weather, wet grass underfoot, wet sky above me. I waken Goldberry singing under window, but naught wakes hobbit folk in the early morning. In the night little folk wake up in the darkness, and sleep after light has come. Ring-a-ding-a-dillo! Wake now, my merry friends, forget the nightly noises. Ring-a-ding-dillo-dell, derry-dell, my hearties. If you come soon, you'll find breakfast on the table. If you come late, you'll get grass and rainwater.
Needless to say, not that Tom's threat sounded very serious. The hobbits came soon, and left the table late, and only when it was beginning to look rather empty. Neither Tom nor Goldberry were there. Tom could be heard about the house, clattering in the kitchen, and up and down the stairs, and singing the here and there outside. The room looked westward over the mist-clouded valley, and the window was open. Water dripped down from the thatched eaves above. Before they had finished breakfast, the clouds had joined into an unbroken roof, and a straight grey rain came softly and steadily down. Behind its deep curtain, the forest was completely veiled. As they looked out of the window, there came, falling gently as if it was flowing down the rain out of the sky, the clear voice of Goldberry singing up above them. They could hear few words, but it seemed plain to them that the song was a rain song, as sweet as showers on dry hills, that told the tale of a river from the spring in the highlands to the sea far below. The hobbits listened with delight, and Frodo was glad in his heart, and blessed the kindly weather, because it delayed them from departing. The thought of going had been heavy upon him from the moment he awoke, but he guessed now that they would not go further that day. The upper wind settled in the west, and deeper and wetter clouds rolled up to spill their laden rain on the bare heads of the downs. Nothing could be seen all around the house but falling water. Frodo stood near the open door and watched the white chalky path turn to a little river of milk and go bubbling away down into the valley. Tom Bombadil came trotting round the corner of the house, waving his arms as he was warding off the rain, and indeed, when he sprang over the threshold he seemed quite dry, except for his boots. These he took off and put in the chimney corner. Then he sat in the largest chair and called the hobbits to gather around him.
Mrs. Goldberry's washing day, he said, and her autumn cleaning. Too wet for hobbit folk, yet them rest while they are able. It's a good day for long tales, for questions and for answers, so Tom will start the talking.
He then told them many remarkable stories, sometimes half as if speaking to himself, sometimes looking at them suddenly with a bright blue eye under his deep brows. Often his voice would turn to song, and he would get out of his chair and dance about. He told them tales of bees and flowers, the ways of trees, and the strange creatures of the forest, about the evil things and good things, things friendly and things unfriendly, cruel things and kind things, and secrets hidden under brambles. As they listened, they began to understand the lives of the forest apart from themselves, indeed to feel themselves as the strangers where all other things were all at home. Moving constantly in and out of this talk was Old Man Willow, and Frodo learned now enough to content him, indeed more than enough, for it was not comfortable lore. Tom's words laid bare the hearts of trees and their thoughts, which were often dark and strange, and filled with a hatred of things that go free upon the earth, gnawing, biting, breaking, hacking, and burning, destroyers and usurpers. It was not called the Old Forest without a reason, for it was indeed ancient, a survivor of vast forgotten woods, and in it there lived yet, aging no quicker than the hills, the fathers of trees, remembering times when they were lords. The countless years had filled them with pride and rooted wisdom, and with malice. But none were more dangerous than the great willow. His heart was rotten, but his strength was green, and he was cunning, and the master of winds. And his song and thought ran through the woods on both sides of the river. His grey, thirsty spirit drew power out of the earth and spread like fine root threads in the ground, and invisible twig fingers in the air, till it had under its dominion nearly all the trees of the forest, from the hedge to the downs. Suddenly Tom's talk left the woods and went leaping up the young stream, over bubbling waterfalls, over pebbles and worn rocks, and among small flowers and close grass and wet crannies, wandering at last up on to the downs. They heard of the great barrows, and the green mounds, and the stone rings upon the hills and in the hollows amongst the hills. Sheep were bleating in flocks, green walls and white walls rose. There were fortresses on the heights. Kings of little kingdoms fought together, and the young sun shone like fire on the red metal of their new and greedy swords. There was victory and defeat. The towers fell, fortresses were burned, and flames went up into the sky. Gold was piled on the biers of dead kings and queens, and mounds covered them. And the stone doors were shut, and the grass grew over all. Sheep walked for a while, biting the grass, but soon the hills were empty again. A shadow came out of dark places far away, and the bones were stirred in the mounds. Barrow wights walked in the hollow places with the clink of rings on cold fingers, and gold chains in the wind. Stone rings grinned out of the ground like broken teeth in the moonlight. The hobbits shuddered. Even in the Shire, the rumours of the Barrow wights, of the Barrow Downs beyond the forest, had been heard. But it was not a tale that any hobbit liked to listen to, even by a comfortable fireside far away. These four now suddenly remembered what the joy of this house had driven from their minds. The house of Tom Bombadil nested under the very shoulder of those dreaded hills. They lost the thread of his tale and shifted uneasily, looking aside at one another. When they caught his words again, they found that he had now wandered into strange regions beyond their memory and beyond their waking thought, into times when the world was wider, and the seas flowed straight into the western shore. And still on and back, Tom went singing out into the ancient starlight, when only the elf sires were awake. Then suddenly he stopped, and he saw that he nodded as if he were falling asleep. The hobbit sat still before him, enchanted, and it seemed as if under the spell of his words the wind had gone, and the clouds had dried up, and the day had been withdrawn, and darkness had come from east and west, and all the sky was filled with the light of white stars. Whether the morning and evening of one day or of many days had passed, Frodo could not tell. He did not feel either hungry or tired, only filled with wonder. The stars shone through the window, and the silence of the heavens seemed to be round him. He spoke at last, out of his wonder and sudden fear that silence. "Who are you, master?" he asked.
Eh? What?
Said Tom, sitting up and his eyes glinting in the gloom.
Don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. Tell me, who are you, alone, yourself, and nameless? But you are young, and I am old. Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He made paths before the big people and saw the little people arriving. He was here before the kings and the graves of the Barrow-wights. When the elves passed westward, Tom was here already, before the seas were bent. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside.
A shadow seemed to pass by the window, and the hobbits glanced hastily through the panes. When they turned again, Goldberry stood in the door behind, framed in the light. She held a candle, shielding its flame from the draught in her hand, and the light flowed through it, like sunlight through a white shell.
"The rain has ended," she said, "and new waters are running downhill under the stars. Let us now laugh and be glad."
And then let us have food and drink, cried Tom. Long tales are thirsty, and long listening is hungry work, morning, noon, and evening.
With that, he jumped out of his chair and, with a bound, took a candle from the chimney shelf and lit it in the flame that Goldberry held. Then he danced about the table. Suddenly, he hopped through the door and disappeared. Quickly he returned, bearing a large and laden tray. Then Tom and Goldberry set the table, and the hobbits sat half in wonder and half in laughter. So fair was the grace of Goldberry, and so merry and odd the caperings of Tom. Yet in some fashion they seemed to weave a single dance, neither hindering the other, in and out of the room, and round about the table. And with great speed food and vessels and lights were set in order. The boards blazed with candles, white and yellow. Tom bowed to his guests.
"Supper is ready,"
said Goldberry, and now the hobbits saw that she was clothed all in silver with a white girdle, and her shoes were like fish's mail. But Tom was all in clean blue, blue as rain-washed forget-me-nots, and he had green stockings. It was a supper even better than before. The hobbits, under the spell of Tom's words, may have missed one meal or many, but when the food was before them, it seemed at least a week since they had eaten. They did not sing or even speak much for a while, and paid close attention to business. But after a time, their hearts and spirits rose high again, and their voices rang out in mirth and laughter. After they had eaten, Goldberry sang many songs for them, songs that began merrily in the hills and fell softly down into silence. And in the silences they saw in their minds pools and waters wider than any they had known. And looking into them, they saw the sky below them, and the stars like jewels in the depths. Then once more she wished them each good night, and left them by the fireside. But Tom now seemed wide awake, and plied them with questions. He appeared already to know much about them and all their families, and indeed to know much of all the history and doings of the Shire, down from days hardly remembered among the hobbits themselves. It no longer surprised them, but he made no secret that he owed his recent knowledge largely to Farmer Maggot, whom he seemed to regard as a person of more importance than they had imagined.
There's earth under his old feet, and clay on his fingers, wisdom in his bones, and both his eyes are open, said Tom. It was also clear that Tom had dealings with the elves, and it seemed that in some fashion news had reached him from Gildor concerning the flight of Frodo. Indeed, so much did Tom know, and so cunning was his questioning, that Frodo found himself telling him more about Bilbo and his own hopes and fears than he had told before, even to Gandalf. Tom wagged his head up and down, and there was a glint in his eyes when he heard of the riders. "Show me the precious ring," he said suddenly, in the midst of the story.
and Frodo, to his own astonishment, drew out the chain from his pocket, and unfastening the ring, handed it at once to Tom. It seemed to grow larger as it lay for a moment on his big brown-skinned hand. Then suddenly he put it to his eye and laughed. For a second the hobbits had a vision, both comical and alarming, of his bright blue eye gleaming through a circle of gold. Then Tom put the ring round the end of his little finger and held it up to the candlelight. For a moment the hobbits noticed nothing strange about this. Then they gasped. There was no sign of Tom disappearing. Tom laughed again, and then he spun the ring in the air, and it vanished with a flash. Frodo gave a cry, and Tom leaned forward and handed it back to him with a smile. Frodo looked at it closely and rather suspiciously, like one who has lent a trinket to a juggler. It was the same ring, or looked the same and weighed the same, but that ring had always seemed to Frodo to weigh strangely heavy in the hand. But something prompted him to make sure. He was perhaps a trifle annoyed with Tom for seeming to make so light of what even Gandalf thought was so perilously important. He waited for an opportunity. When the talk was going on again, and Tom was telling an absurd story about badgers and their queer ways, then he slipped the ring on. Merry turned towards him to say something and gave a start, and checked an exclamation. Frodo was delighted, in a way. It was his own ring all right. For Merry was staring blankly at his chair, and obviously could not see him. He got up and crept quietly away from the fireside towards the outer door.
Hey there!
Cried Tom, glancing towards him with the most seeing look in his shining eyes.
Hey, come Frodo there! Where be you a-going? Old Tom Bombadil's not as blind as that yet. Take off your golden ring, your hand's more fair without it. Come back, leave your game and sit down beside me. We must talk a little while more, and think of the morning. Tom must teach the right road, and keep your feet from wandering.
Frodo laughed, trying to feel pleased, and taking off the ring he came and sat down again. Tom now told them that he reckoned the sun would shine tomorrow, and it would be a glad morning, and setting out would be hopeful. But they would not do well to start early, for weather in that country was a thing that even Tom could not be sure of for long, and it would change some time, quicker than he could change his jacket.
I am no weather master, he said, nor is aught that goes on two legs.
By his advice, they decided to make early due north from his house, over the western and lower slopes of the downs. They might hope in that way to strike the east road, in a day's journey, and avoid the barrows. He told them not to be afraid, but to mind their own business.
Keep on the green grass. Don't you go a-meddling with old stone or cold whites or prying in their houses, unless you be strong folk with hearts that never falter.
He said this more than once, and he advised them to pass barrows by on the west side if they chanced to stray near one. Then he taught them a rhyme to sing, if they should by ill luck fall into any danger or difficulty the next day.
Oh, Tom Bombadil, oh, by water, wood, and hill, by the reed and willow, by fire, sun, moon, and hearken now and hear us. Come, Tom Bombadil, for our need is near us.
When they had sung this all together after him, he clapped them each on the shoulder with a laugh, and taking candles, led them back to their bedroom. That night they heard no noises, but either in his dreams or out of them, he could not tell which. Frodo heard a sweet singing running in his mind, a song that seemed to come like a pale light behind a grey rain curtain, and growing stronger to turn the veil all to glass and silver, until at last it was rolled back, and a far green country opened before him under a swift sunrise. The vision melted into waking, and there was Tom whistling, like a tree full of birds, and the sun was already slanting down the hill and through the open window. Outside everything was green and pale gold. After breakfast, which they again ate alone, they made ready to say farewell, as nearly heavy of heart as was possible on such a morning, cool, bright, and clear under a washed autumn sky of thin blue. The air came fresh from the northwest. Their quiet ponies were almost frisky, sniffing and moving restlessly. Tom came out of the house and waved his hat and danced upon the doorstep, bidding the hobbits to get up and be off,
and go with good speed. They rode off along a path that would away from behind the house and went slanting up towards the north end of the hill brow under which it sheltered. They had just dismounted to lead their ponies up the vast steep slope when suddenly Frodo stopped.
Goldberry! he cried. My fair lady clad all in silver green! We have never said farewell to her, nor seen her since the evening.
He was so distressed that he turned back. But at that moment a clear call came rippling down. There on the hill brow she stood, beckoning to them. Her hair was flying loose, and as it caught the sun it shone and shimmered. A light, like the glint of water on dewy grass, flashed from under her feet as she danced. They hastened up the last slope and stood breathless beside her. They bowed, but with a wave of her arm she bade them look around, and they looked out from the hilltop over lands under the morning. It was now as clear and far-seen as it had been, veiled and misty when they stood upon the knoll in the forest, which would now be seen rising pale and green out of the dark trees in the west. In that direction the land rose in wooden ridges, green, yellow, russet under the sun, beyond which lay hidden the valley of the Brandywine. To the south, over the line of the Withywindle, there was a distant glint, like pale glass, where the Brandywine River made a great loop in the lowlands and flowed away out of the knowledge of the hobbits. Northward, beyond the dwindling downs, the land ran away in flats and dwelling of grey and green and pale earth colours, until it faded into a featureless and shadowy distance. Eastward, the Barrow Downs rose, ridge behind ridge into the morning, and vanished out of the eyesight into a guess. It was no more than a guess of blue and a remote white glimmer, blending with the hem of the sky, but it spoke to them, out of memory and old tales of the high and distant mountains. They took a deep draught of air, and felt that a skip and a few stout rides would bear them wherever they wished. It seemed faint-hearted to go jogging aside over the crumpled skirts of the downs towards the road, when they should be leaping, as lusty as Tom, over the stepping stones of the hills straight towards the mountains. Goldberry spoke to them and recalled their eyes and thoughts.
Speed now, fair guests, she said, and hold to your purpose, north with the wind in the left eye and a blessing on your footsteps. Make haste while the sun shines.
And to Frodo she said,
Farewell, elf friend. It was a merry meeting.
But Frodo found no words to answer. He bowed low and mounted his pony, and followed by his friends jogged slowly down the gentle slope behind the hill. Tom Bombadil's house and the valley and the forest were lost to view. The air grew warmer between the green walls of hillside and hillside, and the scent of turf rose strong and sweet as they breathed. Turning back, when they reached the bottom of the green hollow, they saw Goldberry, now small and slender, like a sunlit flower against the sky. She was standing still, watching them, and her hands were stretched out towards them. As they looked, she gave a clear call, and lifting up her hand, she turned and vanished behind the hill. Their way round along the floor of the hollow, and round the green feet of a steep hill into another deeper and broader valley, and then over the shoulder of further hills, and down their long limbs, and up their smoother sides again, up on new hilltops, and down into new valleys. There was no tree nor any visible water. It was a country of grass and short springy turf, silent except for the whisper of the air over the hedges of the land, and high lonely cries of strange birds. As they journeyed, the sun mounted and grew hot. Each time they climbed the ridge, the breeze seemed to have grown less. When they caught a glimpse of the country westward, the distant forest seemed to be smoking, as if the fallen rain was steaming up again from leaf and root and mould. A shadow now lay round the edge of sight, a dark haze above which the upper sky was like a blue cap, hot and heavy. About midday they came to a hill whose top was wide and flattened, like a shallow saucer with a green-mounded rim. Inside there was no air stirring, and the sky seemed near their heads. They rode across and looked northwards. Then their hearts rose, for it seemed plain that they had come further already than they had expected. Certainly the distances had now all become hazy and deceptive, but there could be no doubt that the downs were coming to an end. A long valley lay below them, winding away northwards until it came to an opening between two steep shoulders. Beyond, there seemed to be no more hills. Due north they faintly glimpsed a long dark line.
That is a line of trees, said Mary, and that must mark the road. All along it, for many leagues east of the bridge, there are trees growing. Some say they were planted in the old days.
Splendid, said Frodo. If we make as good going this afternoon as we've done this morning, we shall have left the downs before the sun sets and be jogging on in search for a camping place.
But even as he spoke, he turned his glance eastwards, and he saw that on the side the hills were higher, and looked down upon them, and all those hills were crowned with green mounds, and on some were standing stones, pointing upwards like jagged teeth out of green gums. That view was somehow disquieting, for they turned from the sight and went down into the hollow circle. In the midst of it there stood a single stone, standing tall under the sun above, and at its hour casting no shadow. It was shapeless and yet significant, like a landmark or a guarding finger, or more like a warning. But they were now hungry, and the sun was still at the fearless noon, so they set their packs against the east side of the stone. It was cool, as if the sun had no power to warm it, but at that time it seemed pleasant. There they took food and drink, and made as good a noon meal under the open sky as anyone could wish, for the food came from down under hill. Tom had provided them with plenty for the comfort of the day. Their ponies under burden strayed upon the grass, riding over the hills and eating their fill, the warm sun and the scent of turf, lying a little too long, stretching out their legs and looking at the sky above their noses. These things are, perhaps, enough to explain what happened. However that may be, they woke suddenly and uncomfortably from a sleep they never meant to take. The standing stone was cold, and it cast a long pale shadow that stretched eastward over them. The sun, a pale and watery yellow, was gleaming through the mist just above the west wall of the hollow in which they lay. North, south, and east, beyond the wall the fog was thick, cold, and white. The air was silent, heavy and chill. Their ponies were standing crowded together with their heads down. The hobbits sprang to their feet in alarm and ran to the western rim. They found that they were upon an island in the fog. Even as they looked out in dismay towards the setting sun, it sank before their eyes into a white sea, and a cold grey shadow sprang up in the east behind. The fog rolled up to the walls and rose above them, and as it mounted it bent over their heads until it became a roof. They were shut in a hole of mist, whose central pillar was the standing stone. They felt as if a trap was closing in about them, but they did not quite lose heart. They still remembered the hopeful view they had had on the line of the road ahead, and they still knew in which direction it lay. In any case, they now had so great a dislike for that hollow place above the stone that no thought of remaining there was in their minds. They packed up as quickly as their chilled fingers could work. Soon they were leading their ponies in single file over the rim and down the long northward slope of the hill, down into a foggy sea. As they went down, the mist became colder and damper, and their hair hung lank and dripping on their foreheads. When they reached the bottom, it was so cold that they halted and got out cloaks and hoods, which soon became bedewed with grey drops. Then, mounting their ponies, they went slowly on again, feeling their way by the rise and fall of the ground. They were steering, as well as they could guess, for the gate-like opening at the far northward end of the long valley, which they had seen in the morning. Once they were through the gap, they had only to keep on in anything like a straight line, and they were bound in the end to strike the road. Their thoughts did not go beyond that, except for a vague hope that perhaps away beyond the downs there might be no fog. Their going was very slow. To prevent their getting separated and wandering in different directions, they went in file, with Frodo leading. Sam was behind him, and after him came Pippin and Merry. The valley seemed to stretch on endlessly. Suddenly Frodo saw a hopeful sign. On either side ahead, a darkness began to gloom through the mist, and he guessed that they were at last approaching the gap in the hills, the north gate of the Barrow Downs. If they could pass that, they would be free.
Come on! Follow me!
He called back over his shoulder, and he hurried forward, but his hope soon changed to bewilderment and alarm. The dark patches grew darker, but they shrank, and suddenly he saw, towering ominous before him, and leaning slightly towards one another like the pillars of a headless door, two huge standing stones.
He could not remember having seen any sign of these in the valley when he looked out from the hill in the morning. He had passed between them almost before he was aware, and even as he did so, darkness seemed to fall around him. His pony reared and snorted, and he fell off. When he looked back, he found that he was alone, and the others had not followed him.
Sam!
He called.
Pippin! Merry! Come along! Well, why don't you keep up?
There was no answer. Fear took him, and he ran back past the stones, shouting wildly.
Sam! Sam! Merry! Pippin!
The pony bolted into the mist and vanished. From some way off, or so it seemed, he thought he heard a cry. It was away eastward on his left as he stood under the grey stones, staring and straining into the gloom. He plunged off in the direction of the call, and found himself going steeply uphill. As he struggled on, he called again, and kept on calling more and more, frantically, but he heard no answer for some time, and then it seemed faint and far ahead and high above him. Came the thin voice out of the mist, and then a cry that sounded like, "Help! Help!" often repeated, ending with the last, "Help." That trailed off into a long wail, suddenly cut short. He stumbled forward with all the speed he could towards the cries, but the light was now gone, and clinging night had closed about him, so that it was impossible to be sure of any direction. He seemed all the time to be climbing up and up. Only the change in the level of the ground at his feet told him where he last came into the top of a ridge or hill. He was weary, sweating, and yet chilled. It was wholly dark.
Where are you?
He cried out miserably. There was no reply. He stood listening. He was suddenly aware that it was getting very cold, and that up here a wind was beginning to blow. An icy wind. A change was coming in the weather. The mist was flowing past him now in shreds and tatters. His breath was smoking, and the darkness was less near and thick. He looked up and saw with surprise that faint stars were appearing overhead amid the strands of hurrying cloud and fog. The wind began to hiss over the grass. He imagined suddenly that he caught a muffled cry, and he made towards it, and even as he went forward the mist was rolled up and thrust aside, and the starry sky was unveiled. A glance showed him that he was now facing southwards, and was on a round hilltop, which he must have climbed from the north. Out of the east the biting wind was blowing. To his right there loomed against the westward stars a dark black shape. A great barrow stood there.
Where are you?
He cried again, both angry and afraid. Said a voice, deep and cold, that seemed to come out of the ground.
I am waiting for you.
No!
Said Frodo, but he did not run away. His knees gave and he fell on the ground. Nothing happened, and there was no sound. Trembling, he looked up in time to see a tall, dark figure like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought there were two eyes, very cold, though lit with a pale light that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip, stronger and colder than iron, seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. When he came to himself again, for a moment he could recall nothing except a sense of dread. Then suddenly he knew that he was imprisoned, caught hopelessly. He was in a barrow. A barrow wight had taken him, and he was probably already under the dreadful spells of the barrow wights, about which whispered tales spoke. He dared not move, but lay as he found himself, flat on his back upon a cold stone with his hands on his breast. But though his fear was so great that it seemed to be part of the very darkness that was around him, he found himself as he lay thinking about Bilbo Baggins and his stories, and of their jogging along together in the lanes of the Shire, and walking about the roads and adventures. There is a seed of courage hidden, often deeply, it is true, in the heart of the fattest and most timid hobbit, waiting for some final and desperate danger to make it grow. Frodo was neither very fat nor very timid, Indeed, though he did not know it, Bilbo and Gandalf had thought him the best hobbit in the Shire. He thought he had come to the end of his adventure, and a terrible end. But the thought hardened him. He found himself stiffening, as if for a final spring. He no longer felt limp like a helpless prey. As he lay there, thinking and getting a hold of himself, he noticed all at once that the darkness was slowly giving way. A pale greenish light was growing round him. It did not at first show him what kind of a place he was in, for the light seemed to be coming out of himself, and from the floor beside him, and had not yet reached the roof or wall. He turned, and there in the cold glow he saw lying beside him Sam, Pippin, and Merry. They were on their backs, and their faces looked deathly pale, and they were clad in white. About them lay many treasures, of gold maybe, though in that light they looked cold and unlovely. On their heads were circlets, gold chains were about their waists, and on their fingers were many rings. Swords lay by their sides, and shields were at their feet, but across their 3 necks lay one long naked sword. Suddenly a song began, a cold murmur rising and falling. The voice seemed far away and immeasurably dreary, sometimes high in the air and thin, sometimes like a low moan on the ground. Out of the formless stream of sad but horrible sounds, strings of words could now and again shape themselves. Grim, hard, cold words, heartless and miserable. The night was railing against the morning of which it was bereaved, and the cold was cursing the warmth for which it hungered. Frodo was chilled to the marrow. After a while the song became clearer, and with dread in his heart he perceived that it had changed into an incantation. He heard behind his head a creaking and scraping sound. Raising himself on one arm, he looked, and saw now in the pale light that they were in a kind of passage, which behind them turned a corner. Round the corner a long arm was groping, walking on its fingers towards Sam, who was lying nearest, and towards the hilt of the sword that lay upon him. At first Frodo felt as if he had indeed been turned into stone by the incantation. Then a wild thought of escape came to him. He wondered if he put on the ring, whether the Barrow-wight would miss him, and he might find some way out. He thought of himself running free over the grass, grieving for Merry and Sam and Pippin, but free and alive himself. Gandalf would admit that there had been nothing else he could do. But the courage that had been awakened in him was now too strong. He could not leave his friend so easily. He wavered, groping in his pocket, and then fought with himself again, and as he did so, the arm crept nearer. Suddenly, a resolve hardened in him, and he seized the short sword that lay beside him, and kneeling, he stooped low over the bodies of his companions. With what strength he had, he hewed at the crawling arm near the wrist, and the hand broke off. But at the same moment the sword splintered up to the hilt. There was a shriek, and the light vanished. In the dark there was a snarling noise. Frodo fell forward over Merry, and Merry's face felt cold. All at once, back into his mind, from which it had disappeared with the first coming of the fog, came the memory of the house down under the hill, and of Tom singing. He remembered the rhyme that Tom had taught them. In a small, desperate voice he began,
"Oh, Tom Bombadil."
and with that name his voice seemed to grow strong. It had a full and lively sound, and the dark chamber echoed as if to a drum and trumpet.
Tom Bombadil, Tom Bombadil, oh, by water, wood and hill, by the reed and willow, by fire, sun and moon, hearken now and hear us. Come, Tom Bombadil, for our need is near us.
There was a sudden deep silence, in which Frodo could hear his heart beating. After a long, slow moment he heard plain, but far away, as if it was coming down through the ground or through thick walls, an answering voice singing,
Oh, Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow, bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. None has ever caught him yet, for Tom is the master. His songs are stronger songs, and his feet are faster.
There was a loud rumbling sound as of stones rolling and falling, and suddenly light streamed in. Real light, the plain light of day. A low door-like opening appeared at the end of the chamber beyond Frodo's feet, and there was Tom's head, hat, feather and all, framed against the light of the sun, rising red behind him. The light fell upon the floor, and upon the faces the 3 hobbits lying beside Frodo. They did not stir, but the sickly hue had left them. They looked now as if they were only very deeply asleep. Tom stooped, removed his hat, and came into the dark chambers singing,
Get out, you old wight, vanish in the sunlight, shrivel like the cold mist, like the winds go wailing, out into the barren lands, far beyond the mountains. Come never here again, leave your barrow empty, lost and forgotten be, darker than the darkness, where gates stand forever shut, till the world is mended.
At these words there was a cry, and part of the inner end of the chamber fell with a crash. Then there was a long trailing shriek, fading away into an unguessable distance, and after that, silence.
Come, friend Frodo, said Tom. Let us get out on clean grass. You must help me bear them.
Together they carried out Merry, Pippin and Sam. As Frodo left the barrow for the last time, he thought he saw a severed hand wriggling still, like a wounded spider, in a heap of fallen earth. Tom went back in again, and there was a sound of much thumping and stamping. When he came out, he was bearing in his arms a great load of treasure. Things of gold, silver, copper and bronze, many beads and chains, and jeweled ornaments. He climbed the green barrow and laid them all on top in the sunshine. There he stood, with his hat in his hand and the wind in his hair, and looked down upon the 3 hobbits that had been laid on their backs upon the grass at the west side of the mound. Raising his right hand, he said in a clear, commanding voice,
Wake now, my merry lads, wake and hear me calling. Warm now be heart and limb, the cold stone is fallen. Dark door is standing wide, dead hand is broken, night under night has flown, and the gates are open!
To Frodo's great joy, the hobbits stirred, stretched their arms, rubbed their eyes, and then suddenly sprang up. They looked about in amazement, first at Frodo, and then at Tom standing larger as life on the barrow top above them, and then at themselves in their thin white rags, crowned and belted with pale gold and jingling with trinkets.
What in the name of wonder?
Began Merry, feeling the golden circlet that slipped over one eye. Then he stopped, and a shadow came over his face, and he closed his eyes.
Of course. I remember, he said. The men of Carn Dûn came on us at night, and we were worsted. A spear in my heart.
He clutched at his breast.
No, he said, opening his eyes. What am I saying? I've been dreaming. Where did you get to, Frodo?
I thought I was lost, said Frodo, but I don't want to speak of it. Let us think of what we are to do now. Let us go on.
Dressed up in like this, sir,
said Sam.
Where are my clothes?
He flung his circlet, belt and rings on the grass, and looked around helplessly as if he expected to find his cloak, jacket and breeches and other hobbit garments lying somewhere to hand.
You won't find your clothes again,
said Tom, bounding down from the mound and laughing as he danced round in the sunlight. One would have thought that nothing dangerous or dreadful had happened, and indeed the horror faded out of their hearts as they looked at him, and saw the merry glint in his eyes.
What do you mean?
Asked Pippin, looking at him, half puzzled and half amused.
Why not?
But Tom shook his head, saying, You found yourselves again, out of the deep water. Clothes are but little loss if you escape from drowning, Be glad, my merry friends, and let the warm sunlight heat now heart and limb. Cast off these cold rags. Run naked on the grass while Tom goes a-hunting.
He sprang away downhill, whistling and calling. Looking down after him, Frodo saw him running away southwards along the green hollow between their hill and the next, still whistling and crying.
Hey now, come boy now, whither do you wander? Up, down, near and far, here do you yonder. Sharp ears, wise nose, swish tail and bumpkin, white socks, my little lad, and old fatty lumpkin.
So he sang, running fast, tossing up his hat and catching it until it was hidden by a fold of the ground. But for some time his hey now, hoy now, came floating back down the wind, which has shifted round towards the south. The air was growing very warm again. The hobbits ran about for a while on the grass as he told them, and they lay basking in the sun with the delight of those that have been wafted suddenly from bitter winter to a friendly clime. Or of people that, after being long ill and bedridden, wake one day to find that they are unexpectedly well, and the day is again full of promise. By the time that Tom returned, they were feeling strong and hungry. He reappeared, hat first, over the brow of the hill, and behind him came in an obedient line 6 ponies, their own 5, and one more. The last was plainly old fatty Lumpkin. He was larger, stronger, fatter, and older than their own ponies. Mary, to whom the others belonged, had not, in fact, given them any such names, but they answered to their new names that Tom had given them for the rest of their lives. Tom called them one by one, and they climbed over the brow and stood in a line. Then Tom bowed to the hobbits.
Here are your ponies now, he said. They've more sense, in some ways, than you wandering hobbits have. More sense in their noses. For they sniff danger ahead, which you walk right into, and if they run to save themselves, then they run the right way. You must forgive them all, for though their hearts are faithful, to face fear of barrow wights is not what they were made for. See, here they come again, bringing all their burdens.
Merry, Sam, and Pippin now clothed themselves in spare garments from their packs, and they soon felt too hot, for they were obliged to put on some of the thicker and warmer things that they had brought against the oncoming of winter.
"Where does that other old animal, that fatty Lumpkin, come from?"
asked Frodo.
He's mine, said Tom, my 4-legged friend. Though I seldom ride him, and he wanders often far, free upon the hillsides. When your ponies stayed with me, they got to know my Lumpkin, and they smelt him in the night, and quickly ran to meet him. I thought he'd look for them, and with his words of wisdom, take all their fear away. But now, my jolly Lumpkin, old Tom's going to ride. Hey! He's coming with you, just to set you on the road, so he needs a pony. For you cannot easily talk to hobbits that are riding, when they're on your own legs trying to trot beside 'em.
The hobbits were delighted to hear this, and thanked Tom many times. But he laughed, and said that they were so good at losing themselves that he would not feel happy till he had seen them safe over the borders of his land.
I've got things to do, he said. My making and my singing, my talking, my walking, and my watching of the country. Tom can't be always near to open doors and willow cracks. Tom has his house to mind, and Goldberry's waiting.
It was still fairly early by the sun, something between 9 and 10, and the hobbits turned their minds to food. Their last meal had been lunch beside the standing stone the day before. They breakfasted now off the remainder of Tom's provisions, meant for their supper, with additions that Tom had brought with him. It was not a large meal, considering hobbits and their circumstances, but they felt much better for it. While they were eating, Tom went up the mound and looked through the treasures. Most of these he made into a pile that glistened and sparkled on the grass. He bade them lie there,
free to all finders, birds, beasts, elves, men, and all kindly creatures.
For so the spell of the mound should be broken and scattered, and no wight ever come back to it. He chose for himself from the pile a brooch set with blue stones, many shaded like flax flowers or the wings of blue butterflies. He looked long at it, as if stirred by some memory, shaking his head, and saying at last,
Here is a pretty toy for Tom and for his lady. Fair was she who long ago wore this on her shoulder. Goldberry shall wear it now, and we will not forget her.
For each of the hobbits he chose a dagger, long, leaf-shaped and keen, of marvellous workmanship, damasked with serpent forms in red and gold. They gleamed as he drew them from their black sheaths, wrought of some strange metal, light and strong, and set with many fiery stones. Whether by some virtue in these sheaths, or because of the spell that lay on the mound, the blades seemed untouched by time, unrusted, sharp, glittering in the sun.
"All knives are long enough as swords for hobbit people," he said. "Sharp blades are good to have if Shire folk go walking, east, south, or far away into dark and danger."
Then he told them that these blades were forged many long years ago, by men of Westerness. They were foes of the Dark Lord, but they were overcome by the evil king of Carandum in the land of Angmar.
Few now remember them,
Tom murmured.
yet still some go wandering, sons of forgotten kings, walking in loneliness, guarding from evil things, folk that are heedless.
The hobbits did not understand his words, but as he spoke, they had a vision, as it were, of a great expanse of years behind them, like a vast shadowy plain over which there strode shapes of men, tall and grim, with bright swords, and last came one with a star on his brow. Then the vision faded, and they were back in the sunlit world. It was time to start again. They made ready, packing their bags and ladding their ponies. Their new weapons they hung on their leather belts under their jackets, feeling them very awkward and wondering if they would be of any use. Fighting had not before occurred to any of them as one of the adventures in which their flight would land them. At last they set off, and then mounting they trotted quickly along the valley. They looked back and saw the top of the old mound on the hill, and from it the sunlight on the gold went up like a yellow flame. Then they turned a shoulder of the downs, and it was hidden from view. Though Frodo looked about him on every side, he saw no sign of the great stone standing like a gate, and before long they came to the northern gap and rode swiftly through, and the land fell away before them. It was a merry journey with Tom Bombadil trotting gaily beside them, or before them on Fatty Lumpkin, who could move much faster than his girth promised. Tom sang most of the time, but it was chiefly nonsense, or else perhaps a strange language unknown to the hobbits. An ancient language whose words were mainly those of wonder and delight. They went forward steadily, but they soon saw that the road was further away than they had imagined. Even without a fog, their sleep at midday would have prevented them from reaching it until after nightfall on the day before. The dark line they had seen was not a line of trees, but a line of bushes, growing on the edge of a deep dike within a steep wall on the further side. Tom said that it had once been boundary of a kingdom, but a very long time ago. He seemed to remember something sad about it, and would not say much. They climbed down and out of the dike, and through a gap in the wall. And then Tom turned due north, for they had been bearing somewhat to the west. The land was now open and fairly level, and they quickened the pace, but the sun was already sinking low when at last they saw a line of tall trees ahead, and they knew that they had come back to the road after many unexpected adventures. They galloped their ponies over the last furlongs and halted under the long shadows of the trees. They were on the top of a sloping bank, and the road, now dim as evening drew on, wound away below them. At this point it ran nearly from southwest to northeast, and on their right it fell quickly down into a wide hollow. It was rutted and bore many signs of recent heavy rain. There were pools and potholes full of water. They rode down the bank and looked up and down. There was nothing to be seen.
Well, here we are again, at last, said Frodo. I suppose we haven't lost more than 2 days by my shortcut through the forest, but perhaps the delay will prove useful. It may have put them off our trail.
The others looked at him. The shadow of the fear of the Black Riders came suddenly over them again. Ever since they had entered the forest, they had thought chiefly of getting back on the road. Only now, when they lay beneath their feet, did they remember the danger which pursued them, and was more than likely to be lying in wait for them upon the road itself. They looked anxiously back towards the setting sun, but the road was brown and empty.
Do you think...
asked Pippin hesitatingly.
Do you think that we may be pursued tonight?
No, I hope not tonight, answered Tom Bombadil, nor perhaps the next day. But do not trust my guess, for I cannot tell for certain. Out east my knowledge fails. Tom is not master of riders from the Black Land, far beyond his country.
All the same, the hobbits wished he was coming with them. They felt that he would know how to deal with black riders if anyone did. They would soon now be going forward into lands wholly strange to them, and beyond all but the most vague and distant legends of the Shire, and in the gathering twilight they longed for home. A deep loneliness and sense of loss was on them. They stood silent, reluctant to make the final parting, and only slowly became aware that Tom was wishing them farewell and telling them to have a good heart and to ride on till dark without halting.
Tom will give you good advice till this day is over. After that, your own luck must go with you and guide you. 4 miles along the road you'll come upon the village, Bree under Bree Hill, with doors looking westward. There you'll find an old inn that is called the Prancing Pony. Barlemon Butterbur is the worthy keeper. There you can stay in the night, and afterwards the morning will speed you upon your way. Be bold, but wary. Keep up your merry hearts, and ride to make your fortune.
They begged him to come at least as far as the inn and drink once more with them, but he laughed and refused, saying,
Tom's country ends here. He will not pass the borders. Tom has his house to mind, and Goldberry's waiting.
Then he turned, tossed up his hat, leaped on Lumpkin's back, and rode up over the bank and away, singing into the dusk. The hobbits climbed up and watched him until he was out of sight.
I'm sorry to take leave of Master Bombadil,
said Sam.
He's a caution and no mistake. I reckon we may go a good deal further and see naught better nor queerer. But I won't deny I'll be glad to see his prancing pony he spoke of. I hope it'll be like the Green Dragon away back home. What sort of folk are they in Bree?
There are hobbits in Bree, said Mary,
as well as big folk. I dare say it will be homelike enough. The pony is good in by all accounts. My people ride out there now and again.
It may be all we could wish, said Frodo, but it is outside the Shire all the same. Don't make yourselves too much at home, and please remember, all of you, that the name of Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if any name must be given. They now mounted their ponies and rode off silently into the evening. Darkness came down quickly, as they plodded slowly downhill and up again, until at last they saw lights twinkling some distance ahead. Before them rose Bree Hill, barring the way, a dark mass against misty stars, and under its western flank nestled a large village. Towards it they now hurried, desiring only to find a fire and a door between them and the night.